Sunny dreamt of boundless blue skies. Beneath them, a patchwork of islands floated in the air, laid on the backdrop of velvety darkness like a beautiful mosaic. Some islands were verdant and green, some were desolate and empty, and some were covered by ancient ruins, the weathered stones overgrown by moss. All of them were bound by colossal iron chains that rattled loudly as the islands rose and fell, hovering above the abyss, a scattering of pale stars shining somewhere far, far below them. In the center of the mosaic, an ugly wound gaped, a vast tear in space where nothing but emptiness remained. A lone island soared above that tear, 7 torn chains hanging from its slopes, a beautiful white pagoda standing on its surface in a mantle of clouds. Suddenly, the sun rolled backward, soon disappearing behind the eastern horizon. The skies darkened, and then were illuminated again as a radiant moon streaked across them, swift enough to turn into a blurry trail of light. A moment later, it was day again, and then it was night once more. The skies grew torn between light and darkness, time flowing in reverse with terrible speed. Sunny watched as the islands beneath him slowly changed their shapes as ruins rose from the ground and assembled into unwavering structures. As the stars burning in the abyss grew brighter and brighter, new ones igniting each moment until the whole void was suffused with a furious white light. One after another, fallen islands rose from that annihilating light, the chains that had tethered them to the rest of the mosaic repairing themselves. Soon, the tear in its center was no more, and instead, a vast ashen wasteland of scorched isles appeared in its place. The ivory tower descended from high above, taking its place at the very heart of the wasteland. An instant later, the ashes were no more, revealing a breathtaking aerial city that sprawled across dozens of islands, all of them connected to each other by arching bridges and overflowing aqueducts built out of pristine white stone, with vibrant flags fluttering in the wind and sparkling waterfalls flowing into the abyss below. Slowly, Sunny's gaze was pulled west, toward the very edge of the chained isles. There, one of the great chains anchored them to the lands beyond, and a mighty fortress stood at the precipice, similar to the other border strongholds he had seen before. The island next to it resembled a vast stone bowl, with rows of seats cut into its weathered white slopes, and a circular arena laying at its bottom, painted dull red. And even further than that was an island with a strange river that flowed endlessly through it, forming a circle around an ancient statue of a beautiful woman wielding a spear in one hand and gripping a beating human heart in the other. Her nakedness, covered only by a beast hide tied around her thighs, her face lost in the shadows. That was the island where Sunny found himself. And, of course, he was thrown straight into the damn river.
God damn it! Why does this keep happening to me?
Sunny was so angry that he didn't even feel any panic, unlike the previous 2 times the spell had decided to give him a cold and wet welcome. First on the Forgotten Shore, then at the Sanctuary of Noctis. This time, at least, he had an idea of where he was, and in which direction to swim if he wanted to reach the surface. Sunny strained his muscles to struggle against the strong current, and finally realized that something was terribly, terribly wrong. His body refused to listen, or rather, it did, but in a way that made no sense at all. His limbs didn't move as he willed them to, and instead of swimming, he simply thrashed around, submerging deeper and deeper into the cold, dark water. His senses were all messed up too, so he couldn't even understand what had gone wrong.
What the hell?
Now Sonny finally was starting to panic a little. This went way beyond what he had experienced in the first nightmare. Back then, the body given to him by the spell had almost felt the same as his own. This time, however, it was way too unfamiliar. Was this what Master Jet had warned him about? Sonny tried to keep calm and swim ashore, but moving through the water, especially with such a strong current, was not an easy task. It required a lot of coordination and a fair bit of balance, which he simply lacked right now. No matter what he tried to do, his efforts only made things worse. He fell deeper and deeper into the river, drowning slowly. His lungs were already starting to burn from the lack of oxygen. They also felt as weird as the rest of him. His vision was already darkening. Sonny gritted his teeth, which suddenly sent a wave of pain through his mouth and jaw, and then stopped struggling, letting the current pull him down. Then he concentrated on his shadow essence, and as soon as his body struck the rocky bottom of the river, stepped through the shadows to appear near the stone statue. Sonny fell into the grass, coughing violently. He tried to suck in a breath of fresh air, only to find out that even that was a struggle. His lungs were refusing to work as they were supposed to, and even though he managed to inhale, it was still not enough to chase the sensation of suffocating away.
What is going on? Damn it.
Sonny sprawled on the ground and closed his eyes, cutting off all of his senses to concentrate on trying to take control of the mess of his new body.
Don't think. Thinking will only make things worse. This thing has to have instincts. You now have them too.
He cleared his mind of any thoughts about breathing and oxygen. And soon, his instincts did indeed take over. It was like the story of a centipede that was asked how it walked and fell down, unable to move. As soon as Sonny stopped thinking about inhaling, his body did so on its own. Suddenly, his lungs were full of sweet air, and he was strong and vigorous once more.
Oh, thank gods.
Sonny did not move for a few moments, breathing deeply, and then tried to understand what type of a vessel exactly had the spell chosen for him. Before he could, however, a beautiful voice suddenly sounded above him, full of curiosity and amusement.
What a strange thing you are.
Sonny opened his eyes and struggled to rise to his feet, turning his head swiftly in the direction of the speaker. When he did, he froze. In front of him, kneeling near the statue, was perhaps the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had soft skin and a delicate, exquisite face, her chestnut hair streaming down her shoulders like lustrous silk. Her eyes were suffused with light and shone gently like two silver stars. Sonny had seen a lot of stunning beauties in his lifetime, but no one could even remotely compare to the quiet, breathtaking grace of this stranger. Just one look at her made his heart race and his face flush. She was more like a fairy than a mere mortal. And maybe she was. The beautiful woman was wearing a simple red tunic that left her shoulders bare and wielded no weapons. Despite that, her presence was vast and permeated the whole island. It was as though the blades of grass bent slightly to be closer to her. The rays of sunshine changed their path to caress her skin, as if she didn't exist in the world, but instead, the world existed around her. And something about her felt strangely familiar. Sonny opened his mouth, stunned, and said,
Greetings.
Or at least He tried to. However, what came out of his mouth instead was a hoarse, bestial growl.
What the?
He tried to speak again, and once more, his mouth produced a low, threatening gnarl. The woman frowned.
One of Shadow God's creatures. How curious. I didn't know that there were any of you left here in the Kingdom of Hope.
Sunny stared at her dumbfounded. Then he lowered his eyes and finally looked at himself.
Oh, crap.
Well, at least one of his desires had come true. Sunny wasn't short anymore. In fact, he was at least 2 meters tall. The problem, however, was that he wasn't a human. His skin was light gray, the color of stone. His legs were long and digitigrade, bending backward and ending with powerful sharp claws. He had 4 arms, each longer and stronger than that of a human, and a long twisting tail. His face was like that of a demon, with sharp features and a mouth full of terrifying fangs. 2 curved horns were growing from his forehead, and his hair was long, black, and coarse. His eyes were fully black, with no irises and 2 vertical, furious pupils. What's worse, Sunny didn't seem to possess the vocal cords of a human. He couldn't speak.
Oh, crap.
The beautiful woman looked at him and smiled. Her smile was dazzling and breathtaking, but made Sunny feel cold and scared for some reason.
You shouldn't have invaded my lands, little creature. But don't worry. I will give you a death most glorious. This I promise before the gods.
She rose, standing tall in front of the ancient statue.
After all, I, Solvain, am nothing if not merciful. Slow down there, lady.
Sunny tried to take a step back, but ended it staggering and almost falling down. Somehow, he managed to keep his balance, crouching as his talons dug into the ground. His 4 arms rose, sharp claws aimed at Solvain. All that talk of glory and death made him very, very tense.
Solvain? Wait, Solvain?
Why did he know that name? Where had he heard it before?
Oh my gods.
A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth as he realized who was standing in front of him. So, this beautiful, graceful woman. She was the ghastly living corpse he had destroyed in the cargo hold of the crashed ship. Or rather, she would be. He had traveled into the past of the Chained Isles after all, or, at the very least, he'd entered an illusory reenactment of it. Whatever the case, it made sense that Solvain had not succumbed to her harrowing fate. Yet, Sunny shivered, remembering the silent pleading and boundless torment in the empty eyes of the Wormvine's host. How could those terrible eyes be the same as the radiant ones looking at him right now? Suddenly, he was overwhelmed by pity, compassion, and sorrow. This woman's destiny was to spend countless years as the unmoving host of a vicious monster, kept alive but unable to move. The only bright spot in that dark abyss of suffering was that one day, Sunny himself would come along and kill her, releasing her from agony. Sunny felt so sorry for this woman. However, he also felt a lot of fear. Fear for himself. Because if he was right, and this was really the same Solvain, then this dazzling stranger who had just promised to gift him a glorious death was a saint. And a saint promising to kill him was not something Sunny had ever wanted to hear. He peered beneath the surface of Solvain's lovely figure and saw a single sphere of light burning brightly in her chest, so radiant as to appear almost blinding. Her soul core, the soul core of a transcendent. Yep, this was a saint, all right. His vertical pupils narrowed, a single thought ringing in his mind.
Run.
Sonny felt that this body was much more powerful than his own, inhumanly so, but without knowing how to properly control it, outrunning a saint was out of the question, if it had ever been. So, his only hope was Shadow Step. He already started to fall into the shadows when a beautiful silhouette suddenly appeared near a graceful hand, falling from above to grasp one of his arms into an iron grip. If not for Boneweave, his wrist would have shattered like glass. The hold of a saint was as inevitable and inescapable as death. Sonny couldn't escape into the shadows anymore, and summoning any memory would have taken too long to be of any use. All except for one. A ghostly stiletto suddenly appeared in his trapped hand and awkwardly shot upward, leaving a thin scratch on Solvain's perfectly smooth, silky skin. She glanced at the scratch, which was slowly welling with blood, a single crimson drop falling into the verdant grass. Her luminous eyes glistened.
Is this fate, then? A sacrifice of blood was made on the altar of war. Little Shadow Spawn, how special you are. So be it.
With that, she smiled radiantly. In the next moment, her other hand moved forward, and Sonny could even feel fear. The world exploded with pain, and then turned utterly dark. Shadows. Shadows. Sonny was surrounded by shadows. Some were close to him, and some were far. Some were small, and some were large. Some moved, and some were still. He was one of the shadows too. No, not one. A swarm of them. A legion of shadows, all hidden in one vast and lightless soul. Silent and tranquil, free of all burdens, free of all desires, free of reason and will. For now.
Ugh, my head hurts.
Slowly, Sonny regained his senses. The first thing he felt was pain, and then the steady beating of his hearts. Hearts? Yes. Apparently he had two now, as well as 4 lungs. What the hell body was this? The thing was heavy and unfamiliar, too large, too cumbersome, and too strange. Something hard and cold was pressed against it, making him feel a dull pain in his limbs. His head ached too, as if he had been struck on it hard enough to shatter a weaker skull. Well, he had been, had he not? The breathtaking beauty Solvain hit him. She killed him.
Damnation. Why am I still in pain if I am dead? What nonsense is this?
Full of outrage, Sonny tried to chase the pain away, but it remained. Why wouldn't it disappear? It wasn't supposed to torment him still. Unless he wasn't dead. And the saint had not, in fact, killed him with one strike. Sonny hissed and opened his eyes. What he saw made him stare for a few moments, and then laugh. Or rather, he wanted to laugh, but what came out of his mouth instead was a chilling, deeply disturbing, uneven wail.
Oh gods, this is just too on the nose. Really? Come on!
Sonny was so unamused because the hard and cold things pressed painfully against his body were the sturdy bars of an iron cage. He was in a cage. Again! And to make matters worse, there was a steel collar wrapped around his neck. Yep, Sonny was, once again, turned into a slave.
Hey, Spell. Is this funny to you? Are you happy with yourself, you wretch?
His new cage was way smaller than his previous one in the Night Temple. In fact, it was barely large enough to fit his lanky body with all its limbs, claws, and horns. The cage was hung from the ceiling by a rusty chain, and every move caused it to sway lightly, the bars digging painfully into his flesh. Sonny growled angrily and looked around, trying to make sense of his previous sensations. What were all the other shadows he had felt close by?
Crap.
All around him were rows of hanging cages of different sizes, and each of them imprisoned a creature of some sort. They were monstrous wolves, stone gargoyles, giant slithering worms, bulging mounds of flesh with gaping circular maws, and all kinds of abominations, some of which he had seen and fought before, and some that he had never even heard of. There were closed metal boxes that produced the sound of hundreds of small feet rustling against their surface, and chains large enough to fit a chain worm. In fact, there was a chain worm, trapped in one not too far away from Sonny. There were even cages that contained humans. Sonny stared at this dungeon of horrors for a bit and shivered. He'd known that the second nightmare was bound to be difficult and terrible, but somehow this was already shaping up to be worse than he'd even imagined. He sighed.
What the hell is this place?
Sonny stared at the menagerie of monsters that surrounded him. He was starting to get used to the fact that his eyesight was different now. His eyes seemed to be much keener and naturally able to see in the darkness, something he'd normally have to use his aspect trait for. However, he now had trouble differentiating colors. The world consisted of various shades of gray, similar to how he used to see the world through shadows. His sense of smell was also enhanced, overloading his mind with an avalanche of new information. It was hard to concentrate on any one thing, let alone make sense of all this mess.
Who cares? Let's just get out of here.
Just like in the Night Temple, the cage limited his shadow sense. However, this one did not sap him of shadow essence, which was a pleasant surprise. Sonny's joy was short-lived, however. As soon as he tried to shadow step away, he realized that he couldn't teleport through the iron bars. What's more, even his shadows couldn't slide through them, as though there was an invisible barrier blocking their way. Sonny gritted his teeth and felt a sharp pain as his fangs sunk into the soft flesh inside his mouth. He tried to curse and produced a furious growl instead. After that, he simply remained motionless for a bit, staring at the other prisoners in the dungeon with gloomy resentment.
Curse it all.
Finally, he shook his head and awkwardly knelt at the bottom of the cage, grasping the iron bars with all four of his hands. Moving twice the amount he had possessed previously was a bit of a challenge, but he did manage after a couple of attempts.
Fine. There are other methods. I'll melt this whole damned cage if necessary.
He stretched one hand through the bars and summoned the cruel sight. Then, nothing happened. The only thing that changed was that his steel collar turned a little colder for a moment. Sonny frowned, his black eyes growing even darker. He tried again. The somber weapon did not appear. There was no tenebrous mist shrouding his hand, and no feeling of a small portion of his shadow essence disappearing to grant the memory a physical shape. Feeling uneasy, Sonny lingered for a second, and then tried to summon the Midnight Shard. Once more, his collar grew colder for a moment, and nothing happened.
What? What is going on?
One after another, Sonny tried to manifest all of his memories, to the same result. His memories refused to appear, and not even a single spark of ethereal light ignited in the darkness of the dungeon. It was almost as if they were all gone, or stolen. Even Weaver's mask. Panicking, he hurriedly summoned the runes, hoping to see that he was wrong, that the list of his memories did not turn empty.
No, 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 no!
But the familiar shimmering runes did not appear. There was nothing in the air in front of him, just cold and dark emptiness.
Wait, what?
Sonny called the runes forth again and again, but they were inexplicably gone. His collar was now as cold as ice.
Can't be.
It was almost as if he was completely cut off from the spell. When the realization hit him, Sonny leaned heavily on the bars of the cage and remained motionless for a while, utterly stunned. What kind of a nightmare was that? How was it even possible to lose connection to the spell? Spell. It was the spell, damn it! The terrifying, almighty spell! Who could snatch an awakened away from it? He wasn't even able to enter his soul sea. The scale and scope of this tectonic change simply failed to fit into his mind. Sonny had spent so long living with the spell that he almost didn't remember what existing without it felt like. It was as though an integral part of his being was suddenly taken away, leaving him hollow and incomplete.
I don't understand.
He was still trying to cope with this new reality when heavy footsteps suddenly resounded through the ghastly dungeon. Raising his head, Sonny saw a giant of a man walking between the hanging cages, his powerful figure radiating a sense of vast, solemn strength. The man was wearing worn leather armor and a tattered red robe, its edges frayed and torn. On his back hung a barbarous curved blade, wide and heavy enough to split any abomination in half, and on his belt, heavy chains rattled with each step. The giant's face was hidden beneath a hood, but Sonny didn't need to see it to know that he was looking at an Ascended. And that Ascended was walking straight to his cage.
Now is my chance. But, to do what exactly?
Sonny was not accustomed to his new monstrous body and was devoid of the ability to summon memories. He was unarmed and defenseless. He didn't even know if his aspect still worked. What was he supposed to do? Try to fight a master with his bare fists? Claws or whatever? Or wait and see what happens. In the end, the cautious part of his mind won. Sonny silently stared as the man in the red robe approached the cage, glanced at him, and then somehow made the iron bars disappear without a trace. One moment they were there, and the next, they shot forward, throwing Sonny to the ground. The giant cruelly slammed his massive fist into Sonny's head, and before he had a chance to shrug off the disorientation, a thick chain was already fastened to his collar. Then, Sonny was dragged somewhere, sliding across the dirty floor as the collar dug painfully into his neck. Not long after that, bright sunlight suddenly blinded him. A sharp pain pierced his black eyes, and a moment later, Sonny was thrown ruthlessly to the ground, landing on it in a graceless heap. Still unable to see, he felt the chain being removed from his collar. Slowly, his eyes adjusted to the light, and even though his vision was not as good as it had been in the darkness, Sonny was able to see that he was sprawled on the stone floor of a circular arena. All around him, rows of seats rose, cut from pristine white stone to form a vast amphitheater. The theater was not crowded, and yet there were a lot of humans seated in it, looking down at him with joy and excitement. They were dressed in simple tunics and other kinds of archaic garments, most of them some shade of red. The arena itself was not white like the rest of the amphitheater. Instead, it was dull red too. Or rather, it might have been pristine once, but now, its stone surface had absorbed too much blood and changed color. Sonny looked up and saw another monster being led off its chain some distance away. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Yes, he was a slave again, but it seemed that this time, fate had made him a very different kind of slave.
Wait, don't tell me.
As the crowd of spectators cheered, the other monster roared, spun around, and fixed its bloodthirsty eyes on Sonny.
It's a damned Colosseum.
Sonny couldn't believe it. He was in a literal Colosseum, a theater of death where slaves fought each other for the entertainment of the crowd, unless they wanted to be slaughtered by the other gladiators or their own masters. He was at the very edge of the Colosseum, with one of its stone walls behind him. There were wooden fences built throughout the arena, partitioning it into many small enclosures, each connected to a next one by a rusty iron gate. 3 sturdy fences formed the rest of the killing box, sharp spikes mounted on them to prevent the combatants from escaping. It looked like something from an old gladiator movie. However, there were a few details separating it from any movie he'd ever seen. For one thing, the slaves were predominantly wild beasts and monsters of all kinds, as opposed to captured humans. The crowd was behaving weirdly too. After his experience in the dreamscape, Sonny expected to see spectators overwhelmed by bloodthirst and dark, cruel fascination. Instead, these people seemed to be joyful and proud, almost solemn. It was as though they were genuinely happy for the gladiators, even a little bit jealous. The crowd was undulating and shifting, singing one word over and over again. Glory, glory, glory. Their voices merged into an echoing, thunderous roar.
What the hell is wrong with these bastards?
Unfortunately, Sonny didn't have a lot of time to think about the weirdness of the audience. He had bigger problems on his plate. In front of him, a large creature was brought forward. Its powerful body was covered in dirty brown fur. 4 mighty paws, a long muzzle with terrifying fangs, and 6 eyes burning with madness. It was very similar to the dreadwolves he had seen at the island covered by strange twisted trees. And it wasn't alone. 2 more beasts appeared from behind the first one, falling low to the ground as guttural growls escaped from their maws.
Damnation!
Sonny shifted his gaze, trying to discern the rank and class of the murderous beasts. They seemed a lot smaller than the fallen monsters he had killed before, at least. simply the size of a bull instead of a full cargo vehicle. His newfound ability to peer into the souls of living things and see their soul cores was going to come in handy. However, what he saw beneath their tough hides left him confused. Instead of spheres of radiant light, the creatures had hideous masses of swirling darkness at the center of their beings, veins of it spreading throughout their souls like cancerous growths. In the depths of that darkness, something unclear seemed to be moving, as if trying to break free. The sight of it was both frightening and repulsive. It reminded him somewhat of the harrowing rot he had witnessed in the Ebony Tower growing from the severed arm of Weaver.
So, this is what soul cores of the nightmare creatures look like.
Sonny had no idea how to judge the rank of such cores, since he only knew to measure the usual ones by their size and luminosity. The growths of darkness in the Dreadwolves seemed to have 2 swirling nodes each, which at least told him that they were mere monsters. Not that it helped him very much. How was he supposed to fight against 3 monsters while barely being able to stand upright in this new, unfamiliar body?
Curse it.
Sonny stared at the wolves, his black eyes full of menacing resentment. His lips parted, revealing sharp fangs that were in no way inferior to that of the monstrous beasts. A low growl escaped from his mouth.
Come on, look at how big and scary I am. You wouldn't want to fight a scary demon like me, would you? One would have to be insane to attack such a monstrosity.
Sadly, this was exactly what nightmare creatures were. Insane. The wolves lunged forward, madness burning in their bloodshot eyes. Their maws opened, foam glistening on jagged fangs. The crowd roared.
Damn it all.
Sonny commanded the shadows to wrap themselves around his body, which suddenly turned black and lusterless, as though cut from obsidian. Thankfully, at least that part of his aspect still worked. Almost instantly, his might quadrupled, and so did his speed. He dashed through the darkness and appeared from the shadow of one of the wolves, his 4 hands shooting forward to grab the beast, sharp claws sinking into the soft flesh. Sonny was still struggling to control his body, so his movements were much slower and messier than they could have been. But embraced by the 3 shadows, he simply used brute power to overcome that disadvantage. Raising the massive monster above his head, he hissed and pulled with all his might. Lean muscles moved like steel cables under his onyx skin, and in the next moment, a river of blood flowed onto his horned head from above as the body of the wolf was mercilessly torn apart. The crowd went wild, their voices growing loud and triumphant, at least of those spectators who were close to his enclosed box. Sonny was more than a little startled by the violent strength of his new body. It was much more powerful than his human one. However, it was also much taller, and his center of gravity was much further from the ground. For that reason, Sonny miscalculated his posture completely and lost his balance. Toppling over as soon as the Dreadwolf's body lost its integrity, he crashed onto the bloodied stones, instinctively raising 2 of his 4 hands to cover his throat. Almost instantly, one of the remaining 2 monsters was upon him, his maw opening wide before closing around his neck like a crushing bear trap. Luckily, Sonny's arms were already in the way, so instead of tearing his throat open, the wolf only managed to bite into them, sharp fangs burrowing through tough skin, piercing flesh, and scraping against bone. Overwhelmed by the explosion of terrible pain and the sudden fall, Sonny momentarily forgot how to control his limbs and operate the shadow demon's body. The second wolf jumped on him, tearing his abdomen with long claws. Not good. This was not good. He was pinned to the ground, defenseless, seconds away from being disemboweled and having his head torn off, and he couldn't even remember how many hands he had and what to do with them. Sonny shuddered, then opened his mouth and roared. His bestial scream washed over the wolves, momentarily stunning them. Then, he moved his two upper hands, grasping the wolf by the jaws, and simultaneously threw his lower arms around the second one. Twisting his body, Sonny threw the monster digging into his abdomen off and pinned it to the stones, at the same time pushing the maw away from his neck. Growling menacingly, he pulled the jaws of one of the monsters apart while crushing the other in a devastating embrace. The three of them struggled furiously for a few moments, more and more gashes and lacerations accumulating on Sonny's body. The pain flooded his mind, clearing it of all unnecessary thoughts. All that remained was a cold and murderous will to kill. He strained the muscles of his demonic body to the limit and finally felt the spine of one of the wolves snap in his embrace, and at the same time, the lower jaw of the other one separate from its skull. A pitiful wail assaulted his ears, and he threw the paralyzed monster away, ripping the other's jaw off entirely. Both wolves fell to the ground, while Sonny was finally able to rise. His fists came down like sledgehammers, crushing the skulls of the abominations into paste. The massive bodies of the nightmare creatures shuddered and then grew still. Sonny was left kneeling, his chest rising and falling heavily. His naked body was covered in deep lacerations and blood, most of it not his own. His eyes were as black as the bottomless abyss of the sky below, and his four hands hung low, claws marred with strands of brown fur, bone dust, and disgusting grayish-red sludge. The crowd cheered loudly, and more spectators started to pay attention, with disturbingly joyful and sincerely pleased expressions on their faces. Sonny sucked in the air into his 4 lungs, his 2 hearts beating wildly, and slowly rose to his feet. He scowled, painfully aware of the absence of the familiar voice announcing his kills. The spell was silent.
Now what?
He wondered. As though to answer his question, a rattling of chains resounded from somewhere up ahead. And then, the rusty iron gate in the front fence of the box rose, opening a path to a new one. This one closer to the center of the arena, and permeated with the smell of death even more. Sonny stared at the newly opened path with a bleak expression, then let out a low growl and walked toward it, now acquainted with his towering body a little bit better.
Damn Solvane, that witch. I am going to kill her. Kill her again, I mean. Anyway, she's going to answer for everything before the nightmare is over. This, I promise before the gods.
Radiating a menacing aura of anger and resentment, Sonny passed beneath the rusted gates and entered the second box. As Sonny staggered toward the next enclosure, he had a few seconds to think. The first thing he realized was that despite the fact that the spell remained silent, he had still received the shadow fragments from the 3 dead wolves. The feeling of his cores and his body growing a tiny bit stronger was there, even though it was hard to sense the minuscule change in all the chaos.
Strange. This is all so strange,
he thought. His connection to the spell seemed to be gone, cut off by the steel collar on his neck, and yet some of his powers remained. Sonny couldn't access his soul sea and summon memories or runes, but he still possessed the ability to absorb fragments He was also able to command his shadow to augment his body, as well as use Shadow Step, even though its range seemed to be limited by the walls of the arena. What did it all mean? Well, from the look of it, while the spell was gone, the aspect remained. There was a lot of meaning hidden in the simple fact, but Sunny had no time to unpack it. What else was his aspect capable of? Walking under the rusty gate, Sunny hesitated for a split second, and then summoned the Soul Serpent. A moment later, almost unnoticeable on his obsidian skin, an intricate tattoo of a coiling serpent appeared, wrapped around his arms and torso. When Sunny sent shadow essence coursing through it, the coils shone with dark radiance, revealing themselves for everyone to see. His lips moved, revealing powerful fangs and a frightening grin.
So you are here as well, buddy.
What did it mean? It meant that Sunny didn't have to fight unarmed anymore. It also meant that the Saint was with him as well. He might not have been the most deadly of creatures at the moment, still unaccustomed to his new lumbering body. But the two of them, together, Sunny and the Saint were a duo most fearsome. Full of new confidence, he entered the second killing box, sending his shadow sense forward to encompass it. What he saw there made him squint a little. There was already a battle going on in the enclosure. A pair of humans desperately trying to fight off a swarm of small, swift, lizard-like creatures. Both of them wore white tunics, the younger one unarmed, while the older one had a simple sword in his hands and a leather cuirass protecting his torso. Several human corpses lay on the ground, terribly disfigured by the sharp claws and triangular fangs of the abominations, with their once white clothes soaked in blood. Sunny shifted his gaze and saw the vile darkness spreading through the souls of the lizard-like gremlins. From the look of it, they were all awakened, the same as the wolves he had fought. Sunny measured the strength of the monsters during the battle and judged their rank to be the same as his. The younger man was an awakened as well, with a single radiant soul core, while the older one had none at all. He was a mundane human. As Sunny watched, the older warrior was finally overwhelmed and fell to the ground. The gremlins easily tearing through his cuirass, sinking their claws and teeth into the soft flesh beneath. The young man screamed and dashed to help him, but it was already too late. Even though the awakened youth managed to kill several beasts, his partner was already mortally wounded. The warrior shuddered, a river of blood flowing from a ghastly gash in his neck, and weakly pushed the hilt of the sword into the younger man's hands. The crowd went wild, happily chanting the same damned word.
Glory! Glory! Glory!
The last surviving human raised his head, pain and sorrow mixing with hatred in his light blue eyes. He didn't get to dwell on his loss for long, though, because the remaining gremlins were already rushing to tear him apart. Some, however, found a new target. Sunny had been spotted. Sunny grunted and tried to control his body as precisely as possible. He didn't command the Soul Serpent to assume the form of a weapon or summon the Saint yet, preferring to keep his cards hidden for now. The lizard-like abominations did not seem too dangerous anyway, at least not with their remaining numbers and their attention split between two targets.
Curses.
The four-armed demon's gaunt body was too tall, heavy, and unwieldy. Every motion required more effort and was slower than he was used to. Even though there was inhuman strength in the shadow creature's steel muscles, which was supposed to translate into explosive speed, dragging so much mass around was still different from operating a small and slim human body he had possessed before.
Who would have thought that I would miss being short one day?
4 gremlins jumped at Sunny at the same time, More of them lagging a second behind. Their narrow eyes shone with rabid bloodlust, and their jagged claws were aimed at his flesh, lusting to rip it apart. Wrapped in shadows, with the coils of the soul serpent shining darkly on his skin, Sunny took a step forward and caught all four creatures from the air, then slammed their skulls against each other, crushing them. Even though he was having trouble controlling his new body, how could these beasts ever hope to survive a battle against a demon? And a very special one at that. Sunny bared his teeth and lunged forward, a low growl escaping from his mouth. His forearms moved, crushing flesh and bone. Several beasts managed to slip past his assault and sink their claws into his thighs. One even trying to bite off a big chunk of flesh. Sunny hissed from pain and crouched, using his claws to rip four more gremlins apart. There was no free hand to finish off the last one, so he simply bit off its arm with his sharp fangs, feeling the bone crunch and the disgusting taste of corrupted blood on his tongue.
Ugh, I'm going to vomit.
Sunny spat a mouthful of fetid dark blood and silenced the shrieking creature with a bone-shattering backhand slap. Suddenly, the box became deathly silent. He groaned, overwhelmed by pain for a moment. The damned abominations had died rather easily, but not before doing a lot of damage. He might have overestimated his newfound prowess, or underestimated the gremlins due to their small stature and frail frames. The irony. Sunny gritted his teeth, this time careful not to pierce his own lips by doing so, then wiped his face and straightened. Finally, he glanced in the direction of the remaining group of abominations. To his surprise, they were already dead. The young awakened had slaughtered them with the sword somehow, and was now standing there, motionlessly, frozen stiff by fear. The youth was staring at him with a pale face, eyes wide with terror. Then, he took an unsteady step back, and whispered, "Oh gods, Lord protect me against the hideous demons of the night." Sunny looked down at him from his immense height, his cobalt-black body covered in terrible wounds and blood, more streaming from between his sharp fangs. He suppressed the desire to roll his eyes.
Hideous. Rude.
Sunny glanced down at the young man, then slowly moved toward him. The awakened shuddered and took another involuntary step back, then gritted his teeth and lowered his stance, raising the sword into a proper defense position.
Lord, shine thy light upon me. Let my soul burn unextinguished, as the sun can never be extinguished. I've seen suns fade away and disappear before. Never say never, fool.
Sunny listened to the strange prayer and allowed one of his shadows to slide off his menacing body, flowing to the ground like a dark veil. After that, he hissed from pain and stopped near a mangled human corpse. He stared at the trembling youth for a few moments, and then bent down, stretching his hands toward the body. The young man flinched and fell silent, then shouted,
"Get your vile hands away from him, demon!"
Sunny ignored the awakened and used his claws to rip the white tunic off the corpse. Then, he straightened and glanced at it with displeasure, his black eyes narrowing. This one was not too dirtied by blood, but sadly, its previous owner was of a normal size for a human. As such, the tunic was way too small for Sunny's new towering body. he snarled, and then tried to tie the tunic around his waist to make a makeshift loincloth. There was a big problem, though. His tail. Sonny froze, somewhat confused about what to do. Then, he awkwardly tore a hole in the tunic and made another attempt. This one, thankfully successful. With his nakedness finally covered, he instantly felt better and turned his attention back to the trembling youth. The young man was staring at him with wide eyes, periodically glancing at the unceremoniously disrobed corpse at his feet. Finally, he opened his mouth.
You barbarous beast! Have you no shame?
Sonny grinned, revealing 2 rows of sharp fangs and 4 long, terrifying canines. In the next moment, though, his smile dimmed, because there was a suddenly familiar pressure rising in his mind, so his flaw remained as well.
Damn it.
He hesitated, then slowly shook his head. Instantly, the pressure disappeared.
Figures. I can't escape the damn curse even when I'm mute. How is this even fair?
The awakened blinked.
No, of course not. Why would a demon know shame? It's... Wait. You can understand me.
With the spell gone, its magical ability to translate any language in the nightmare was gone too. However, Sonny found himself able to discern what the young man was saying, as well as the only word the spectators seemed to know, even if it demanded some effort. The language they spoke was not exactly the same as the ones he had learned before, first in the academy and later during his travels in the dream realm, but similar enough to make out some of the words. He was able to deduce the rest. Sonny stared at the youth from above, then nodded darkly. The young man blinked.
Wait, are you not one of the corrupted then? What kind of creature are you?
Sonny scowled. The word meant something that was tainted, infected, changed, and perverted. A being cursed with some form of corruption. But what exactly was the awakened asking? Was he referring to the nightmare creatures, perhaps? He hesitated, then shook his head again and pointed to the coils of the soul serpent glistening on his skin. The youth frowned, confused.
A snake? A serpent? Can that demon be Shadow's kin? No wonder the warriors hunted him down then. Their god and Shadow are old enemies.
Sonny's head tilted to the side with confusion.
Is he talking to me? Or to himself?
Sonny paused for a moment, then took a step forward. The awakened flinched, torn away from his pondering, and raised his sword higher.
Stay away, demon, or I will...
He fell silent when Sonny's gaunt, towering, monstrous form walked past him with absolute indifference. Sonny wasn't going to fight the youth, unless the fool chose to attack first, of course. Made into a gladiator or not, he was not going to play the part of an obedient slave. He had no qualms with killing humans, but not to satisfy anyone's thirst for entertainment, especially not anyone wishing to be his owner. They would have to come down in person if they wanted to force him. He studied the dead humans, men, women, young and old. The only thing in common they had was the color of their white garments. Some had been unarmed, and some had wielded weapons. The weapons were what he was really interested in. There was a couple laying on the red stones, none of them bearing any enchantments. He picked up a battle axe, glanced at it, and then threw it back to the ground. What was the point of having a mundane weapon? His claws were sharp and far more devastating. Luckily, the young man seemed to have decided against using the sword against him too. He just stood there, staring at the corpses, a dark and inconsolable expression on his face. The steward of the arena, whoever that was, did not seem to want them to kill each other as well. With the sound of scraping metal, another rusty gate rose, opening the path to the third box. This one, even closer to the center of the Colosseum. Sonny and the young awakened glanced at each other warily, and then walked toward the gate together. Sonny's next cage was larger and more comfortable. At least he could stand up straight in it. Not that he was in any mood to do so. In the end, he was forced to fight his way through 7 killing boxes, the last circular one at the very heart of the Colosseum. In each box, a new nightmare creature, or a group of them, awaited. Those abominations who had prevailed in their own battles at the outer circles of the arena. In this way, only the strongest and the most ferocious of the enslaved creatures had a chance to reach the center. The further they went, the louder the cheers of the spectators became. And on the final stage, their salvation awaited. Kill the final enemy and get the chance to live another day. Only to be forced to go through this meat grinder again, undoubtedly, collecting more wounds, more kills, more glory. Sonny had received a lot of injuries so far. As for the glory, he wasn't so sure. He was currently sprawled out on the bottom of a hanging cage, his body a map of gashes, lacerations, and bruises. Everything hurt. But at least he wasn't bleeding. That was the benefit of losing his chance to receive Shadow God's lineage. He was slowly healing. In the cage next to him, the awakened with light blue eyes sat, an empty and hollow expression on his smooth, youthful face. The young man had somehow managed to survive as well, but grew quiet and despondent after they were brought back to the dungeon. Sonny didn't blame him. He was a bit desperate too. Yes, they had survived today, but just barely. And who knew how many such days there were going to be in the future? Somehow, he had a disturbing feeling that once someone had entered the arena, they never left it alive. Sonny closed his eyes, exhausted. So what if his fate was to die as a slave in this cursed Colosseum? Fate was not something immutable. It was just very, very hard to change. Was he, or was he not, the heir to the demon of fate? If anyone could do it, it was him. Caged in the darkness, Sonny had a lot of time to think. All around him, a horde of nightmare creatures and a few unfortunate human slaves waited for their turn to be slaughtered in the blood-soaked arena. Here, in the nightmarish dungeon, both abominations and people were the same, equal in the face of inevitable death. His thoughts returned to the very start of the trial, to the announcement the spell made. 5 brave ones. Someone else had entered the nightmare with them, and Sonny had a good idea who. Mordred, the Prince of Nothing, still lived against all odds and had found a way to reach his goal. Perhaps his reflection had hidden in the eyes of Saint Cormac and then slid unnoticed into either Effie's or Kai's. Was one of his friends dead? No, that didn't make sense. If Mordred had devoured one of the souls aboard the ancient flying ship, then someone would have noticed. The Firekeepers were a close group and knew each other too well to miss a sudden change in the demeanor of one of them. As for Effie and Kai, if they had fallen victim to Mordred's terrifying ability, then there would have been only 4 souls entering the nightmare. But who was to say that the Prince of Nothing had to invade a soul once his reflection jumped into the person's eyes? Maybe he could just hide in the reflections, biding his time and waiting for an opportunity to find a better vessel. And speaking of vessels, Sonny studied his monstrous body, his black eyes full of somber apprehension. Why had he been sent into the body of a demon? The spell was supposed to find suitable vessels for the challengers. Had he been made into a hideous abomination because of his 3 shadow cores? After all, it was hard to find a human with a soul worthy of a divine aspect. If so, was Mordred in the body of a terror right now? Hidden in the darkness, Sonny shivered. Yes, this was most likely the case. This fact had the potential to either reveal itself to be a blessing or a curse. In theory, all 5 of them had the same goal: to resolve the conflict of the nightmare and ascend. So, having a terror fight on their side would be a boon, no matter how much resentment Sonny had for the bastard. He also suspected that Mordred wielded the ivory knife, increasing their chances of success even further. But Sonny also remembered what Master Jet had told them. Not all of the awakened trying to conquer the trial of the spell had to pursue the same goal. Sometimes their solutions and ideals clashed, making them enemies. The idea of having Mordred as an enemy in this already insurmountable hell scared him. The Prince of Nothing was maybe the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. Would Mordred turn on the other 4 humans that had entered the seed? It was impossible to tell. He was not cruel for the sake of cruelty, and was not nearly as insane as everyone seemed to think. His hatred was directed toward Valor, and not them. But at the same time, Sonny could not say that the banished prince was completely of sound mind. Why would Mordred even care if Sonny's friends survived? Would he be unsettled enough to kill them out of sheer spite? Or worse, for some twisted sense of fun? Something about him. When Sonny looked Mordred in the eyes, it felt as though something was missing in them. It was a very small difference, but one that made facing the Prince of Nothing strangely unsettling. Perhaps it was from the loss of his body. Did that remove a piece of his soul? Mordred was a wild card, one whose actions Sonny simply could not predict. There's no point in dwelling on it right now. Unless I find a way to escape this morbid place alive, all that awaits me is death anyway. He shifted and hissed slightly as pain radiated through his body, originating from countless wounds. Sonny thought back to his battle in the arena. Strange. It was all so strange. Some of his powers were gone, but others remained. His aspect seemed to be unaffected, but his connection to the spell was gone. Then, did this mean that an aspect was not a part of the spell, but instead existed outside of it? Trapped in an unbreakable enchanted cage, Sonny scowled. A long, long time ago, back when he had passed the first nightmare and received his aspect, it had felt as though the power was coming from somewhere deep within him, as opposed to from an external source. Was the spell only awakening inherent powers that were locked inside human souls and not creating them? Wait a minute. Come to think of it, Gregor had claimed to be an awakened, and while the youth sitting silently in the nearby cage had not said it, he was an awakened too. But in this ancient past, the gods were still alive, and so were the daemons. Their terrible war had not started yet, and Weaver had not disappeared to create something that would spell doom for both the 6 gods and the 6 daemons. Create the nightmare spell. If Sunny's suspicions were correct, of course, that meant the nightmare spell didn't even exist in this era yet. But Awakened did, as well as nightmare creatures, or the Corrupted, as this youth had called them. Sunny's vertical pupils narrowed. Were the nightmare creatures not created by the nightmare spell as well? What the hell? Sunny's mind was spinning. It was wild enough to be tossed back into this world at a completely different time than before. But now? Now he was questioning everything he thought he knew, and everything society thought they understood about their world. The very idea seemed strange and ridiculous. The spell had appeared in the waking world, causing the first nightmare creatures to be made from the bodies of those infected by it, and for the first generation of the Awakened to be born. It summoned those awakened into the dream realm, which was populated by the abominations, and pushed them towards seeking out and challenging the seeds of nightmares. Unless a seed was conquered, it eventually opened a path for more monsters to enter reality. The very idea of nightmare creatures, aspects, and Awakened was inseparable from the spell, and yet, somehow, it was not. Could that be true? Sunny groaned, startled again by how deep and foreign that sounded coming out of his demon body. What does it all mean? Sunny ground his fangs, overwhelmed by a myriad of thoughts, and a lot of confusion. It seemed as though the very foundation of his worldview had suddenly turned out to be built on shifting sand. He closed his eyes and scowled, feeling a dull headache approaching. Then raised 2 hands and rubbed his face, careful not to slice it open with the claws. Suddenly, the cage next to him swayed. The young Awakened stood up and grabbed the bars, staring into the darkness. A few moments later, he said hoarsely, "Demon! Hey, demon! Wake up! They're coming!" Glory, glory, glory. Sunny growled, falling to the ground, the heavy body of a stone gargoyle pressing him down, its claws buried in his chest. A dark radiance rose from his skin. The scales of a coiling serpent became more visible, and then one of the forearms of the abomination shattered, pulled apart by his hands. The creature roared, its tail shooting forward like a spear. He had no time to dodge or deflect the blow, so instead, Sunny simply endured the blinding pain of the stone spike piercing his shoulder, and pushed with his feet, straining to jump up. As a result, his horns struck the gargoyle in the chin, impaling it through the skull. Something cold streamed down his face, and, momentarily blinded, Sunny struck the abomination in the chest with all his might, sending the stone Goliath flying back. The gargoyle exploded into a rain of stone shards when its body struck the floor of the arena. Sunny breathed heavily, his torso a mess of torn flesh, and then tiredly searched for the remaining enemy, which was supposed to be fighting the awakened youth, if he was still alive. His second day in the Colosseum had been both easier and more harrowing than the first. It was easier because Sunny was slowly growing accustomed to his new inhuman body, For someone else, this process might have taken longer, but he had always put adaptability and control of his physicality first. Both the flowing battle style Nephis had taught him and Shadow Dance were meant to make the practitioner as flexible and versatile as possible, the latter especially being the pinnacle of malleability. So, he had plenty of practice to prepare himself for waking up in the body of an actual demon, ironically. Who would have thought? But this day's battles were also much more lethal. At first, Sonny had thought that his luck was just this bad. But after he and the young awakened had barely survived the first 2 boxes, the youth shared a bit of knowledge that put everything into perspective. Apparently, by surviving the previous day's slaughter and making their way to the center of the arena, the 2 of them earned the privilege of being added to the main herd of gladiators. In other words, everyone and everything they faced today had won 7 consecutive fights in the past as well. This was the cream of the crop of enslaved combatants, more or less. And the final stage was also going to be different. Sonny rolled the many shoulders of his massive arms. Damnation! He sensed 2 swift shadows some distance away, then finally saw them. His eyesight wasn't the best in daylight, so Sonny relied on shadow sense more and more. The kid was still alive, wielding a simple sword and a rusty shield that he had picked up in their second fight. He was dancing around the gargoyle, showing a good grasp of combat technique, and more than a little bit of talent. The young man was inexperienced, but incredibly adaptable. His battle prowess was perhaps on par with what Sonny himself had shown on the Forgotten Shore, or even greater. Not that it was going to help the youth. What was the point of knowing how to wield a sword when that sword had no chance of piercing the enemy's stone skin? Demon, I can't hold it off much longer! Sonny sighed, then stepped through the shadows, appearing behind the gargoyle in a whirlwind of claws. With a loud roar, he crashed into the towering creature and caught it in a deadly embrace. The steel cables of his muscles moved under the obsidian skin, and with a low growl, Sonny lifted the heavy abomination into the air. Gods, is this how much the saint weighs? Even for his demonic body, the heft of a monster with similar proportions, made entirely out of stone, was almost too much. Almost. Without stopping his lunge, Sonny carried the gargoyle forward like a speeding train and smashed the creature against the spikes mounted on the wall, impaling it on them. The crowd roared, expressing their joy and admiration for his brutality. Sonny watched as the light was extinguished in the eyes of the abomination, then took a step back and fell heavily to one knee. Gods, I wish they would stop cheering. For just a minute. Bloodthirsty bastards. Today, he hated the spectators even more than he had yesterday. The awakened youth was already beside him, staring at the dead gargoyle with a dark expression. Then, he glanced at his sword, and finally at the four-armed monstrosity near him. Demon, you don't look too well. Sonny looked at him with his black eyes. No recognizable human expression on his strange bestial face. No way. He noticed? Sonny indeed did not look too well. He looked terrible, with his obsidian skin torn in many places and sliced muscle tissue visible beneath. The most disturbing thing about it was the fact that his mangled flesh was awash with crimson blood, but none of it flowed out of the wounds, as if possessing a will of its own. He had not fared as well as he had thought he would in the battle against the gargoyles, in large part because the monsters had turned out to be much more powerful and swift than the similar creatures he had fought before. in the future. Although Sonny was reluctant to do so, he suspected that he would have to reveal at least one of his 2 hidden cards, the Soul Serpent or Saint, before too long. The youth hesitated for a few moments, then suddenly stepped forward and put his hand on Sonny's torn chest. Sonny hissed, shocked by the unexpected gesture.
Don't move, demon. I'm trying to help you.
Suddenly, the young man's light blue eyes shone with cerulean light, and his curly blonde hair moved as if brushed by an otherworldly wind. Something about this was familiar. Sonny felt the curious thought tickling the back of his brain.
What the hell?
A warm sensation spread from his palm into Sonny's aching body. Slowly, the pain receded, and at the same time, the torn fibers of his flesh started to repair themselves, growing back together. In a dozen seconds or so, miraculously, the terrible wounds on his body had almost closed. The young man, however, paled considerably and stepped back, his breathing fast and rugged. It seemed as though his soul essence was largely drained.
Well, I'll be damned.
The fool was a healer. Sonny couldn't know whether to laugh or cry. On one hand, awakened healers were incredibly rare, and having one as his ally was of tremendous benefit. On the other hand, his only ally in the battle arena also turned out to possess an aspect that was absolutely useless in a fight. So, there was that as well. The iron gates rattled, opening the path to the next killing box. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, and then rose to his feet.
No, this is good. I can kill anything the slavers throw at us. He just has to keep me alive.
He glanced at the pale youth, then nodded curtly, and headed toward the gates. Before walking through them, however, he stopped and tore off the long strip of the dead gargoyle's tail. Then handed it to the young man. The stone spike of an awakened nightmare creature was bound to perform better than a mundane weapon at least. The awakened stared at him for a bit, then sighed and dropped the sword onto the ground. They walked through the gate, and Sonny's face instantly darkened.
I know that smell.
The chain worm he had seen before in the dungeon was already crawling through the other gate, its terrifying maw dripping with black blood. The crowd began its chant again, ecstatic to see the fallen demon advance to the next box. He sighed, full of dread and hatred.
All right, bastards. I'll show you glory.
Sonny tore the chain worm apart, pieces of flesh and puddles of blood showering the red stones of the arena like a ghastly carpet. Then, shrouded in impenetrable shadows, he thrust his hands into the mangled carcass of the slain abomination and ripped 3 bloody soul shards out. Ironically, killing the fallen demon had not been too hard for him. A long time ago, Master Roan had described these vile creatures as incredibly formidable and deadly opponents, someone that even he would not have wanted to face alone. But that was because Master Roan was a human. Chain worms fed on metal, and as such, steel weapons and armor were useless against them. Sonny would have been in trouble if he was still in his human body, and most of his arsenal of memories suddenly became ineffective. However, he was a demon now, one of the Shadow Spawn, or whatever it was he had been turned into. His claws, his fangs, and his shadows were the perfect weapon to destroy such abominations. Of course, Fighting against a creature one rank higher than him was not easy, but augmented by 3 shadows, he had managed to dismantle the massive abomination without too much trouble. In fact, killing the chainworm had been much easier than killing Master Pierce. He wasn't even wounded, at least not seriously. The crowd grew silent, shocked by his display of ruthless brutality, and then exploded with cheers. Glory, glory! It seemed that they enjoyed seeing someone triumph against a stronger opponent much more than anything else.
Crazy bastards.
Sonny glanced at the spectators with resentment, then walked over to the young awakened and pushed the soul shards into his hands. The youth looked at them with a frown. These are soul shards?
Gods, how can he be an awakened and not know what a shard looks like?
Sonny stared at the young man darkly, then nodded and raised one hand to his chest, making a fist. The awakened hesitated. Don't you want to consume them yourself? Sonny snarled, then shook his head. Finally convinced, the youth crushed the shards in his fists and froze, a funny expression appearing on his face. What a strange feeling. Sonny rolled his eyes.
Whatever.
Sonny wasn't giving the shards away out of altruism. For better or worse, the young man was now his partner. The stronger he became, the better he would be able to aid Sonny, both in battle and while using his healing aspect. And Sonny was going to need a lot of healing. That he was sure of. After that was done, they proceeded to the 5th cage, and then to the 6th, and finally to the last. By that point, Sonny was nearing his limit. Both battles after the chainworm had tested him in ways he had not expected, draining him of essence, damaging his body, and putting a heavy strain on his endurance. He was exhausted and overwhelmed by pain. The merciless sun shining blindingly in the blue skies and making his black eyes ache. At least the crushing seemed to ignore the island where the Colosseum was located. In fact, Sonny had not felt the island move either up or down even once. Perhaps it had a permanent altitude, like the sanctuary of Noctis. The 7th battle, the last one they had to survive today, was indeed different. The central stage of the arena was circular in shape, with 6 gates in its walls. 4 were already opened, and 2 still stood closed. Corpses of several terrifying creatures lay on the red stones, steam rising from the pools of blood surrounding them. And in the middle of the killing stage, 2 humans stood, their faces hidden behind the helmet visors. Both were tall, strong, and clad in archaic armor. Their garments were painted bright red, and so were the plumes on their helmets. One was armed with a spear and a shield, while the other wielded an axe and a sword. These were worshippers of the war god, just like the spectators singing from the stone seats of the great amphitheater. The young man shivered. Warmongers, these mad dogs. Sonny tilted his head, paying no attention to the raging crowd as he studied the 2 humans. Both were awakened, and from the look of it, of sufficient power and skill. They were calm and solemn, their eyes empty of even a hint of fear, and instead full of confidence and savage joy. Glory. That was what all of them were here for, willingly or not. The masters of the arena wanted their slaves to fight for it, but they also wanted to achieve it themselves. After the initial culling had taken place, the final obstacle the gladiators had to overcome each day was to kill some of their slavers. And the slavers had to survive the onslaught of the slaves if they wished to live. all of the battles in the arena served a singular purpose: to deliver the best and most formidable opponents for the worshippers of war to prove themselves, or die trying.
Mad dogs indeed.
All these people were insane. Sonny was now more sure of it than ever. It didn't change anything, though. He still had to kill the two awakened warriors if he wanted to survive. Or, rather, if he wanted to earn the chance to be killed in the arena some other day. With a low growl, Sonny sent one of the shadows to the ground. In this fight, being aware of his surroundings was going to be more important than raw strength. No awakened human could challenge him in terms of raw might, after all. Unless their aspect was solely focused on it. But such an aspect was the least dangerous an enemy of his could possess. It was easy to understand and predictable at least. It was the versatility and unpredictable nature of aspects that made Awakened so dangerous. Without much fanfare, the four of them lunged at each other, an almost palpable killing intent permeating the arena. The two warriors fought with tremendous skill and combat prowess. The two warriors fought bravely and furiously, moving like two parts of a single organism. The two warriors fought with incredible insight and cunning, both wielding clarity like a deadly weapon. Truly, they were worthy of being the followers of war. But in the end, both of them died. How could they resist a creature that could turn their skill against them, who had faced terrors so vast that most humans would have been driven mad by a mere glimpse of them, and who had lived his life wearing countless lies like a mantle? Sonny watched as the corpse of the second human fell to the ground, awash in blood, light dimming in his unbelieving eyes, and sighed.
Here's your glory, poor fools. How does it taste? Is it sweet? Is it bitter? Or does it taste like nothing at all, like the empty lie that it is?
Turning away from the dead men, he glanced at the crowd, expecting to finally see sorrow and displeasure on the faces of the spectators. He had just killed two of their own, after all. But his hopes were instantly crushed. The people gathered in the amphitheater were not at all perturbed by the death of their brethren. Instead, they were even more excited, pride and joy gleaming on their faces. Laughing and smiling, they pointed at him and yelled one word over and over. Only this time, it was a new one. All of them were shouting, "Shadow!" Shadow! 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 Sonny swayed, looking at the broken sword in his hand. When did it break? He couldn't quite remember. This was one of the first weapons he had picked up in the arena, right after killing... Wait. Who had he killed for that sword? Dead faces spun in his mind, staring at him with empty eyes. There were so many that he couldn't even tell if they had once belonged to real enemies, or were simply figments of his imagination. No, that one was real. The first human he had killed in the Colosseum. That had been the battle where he took the sword. These days, he was having trouble remembering things. Sonny threw the broken sword away and looked at the crowd that was chanting his name. Shadow. Right. That was him.
What is wrong with you, fool? Since when was that your name?
He growled, wishing that he had thrown the broken weapon at one of the humans. Not that it would have done any good. There were powerful enchantments permeating the ancient stones of the Colosseum. Some of them were meant to prevent the fighters from escaping. Others protected the audience from their ire. Some he had no idea about. All his attempts to break free of this cursed place had failed. For now. Demon? Are you all right? Sonny lingered for a few moments, then glanced at the youth who'd become his partner. He'd gradually learned that the boy's name was Elias, and that he was a healer. These were some of the only facts that could find purchase within Sonny's mind. That, and the fact that they needed to keep fighting. Currently, Elias was looking at him with a strange expression on his face, a bit of apprehension hiding deep in his light blue eyes. The youth had grown considerably stronger in the weeks they had spent fighting all kinds of monsters, both of the nightmare creature and humankind, in the arena. All those soul shards had not been wasted on him. His healing ability was now much more potent, and his skill as a warrior blossomed. His face also changed, becoming gaunt and angular, almost mature. One had no choice but to grow up quickly in this hell. The pain of the flaw washed over Sonny, finally shattering his strange trance. He gritted his teeth and nodded.
Well, good. You've been weird recently, you know? I have some essence left, so let me heal you before they take us back to our cages.
Sonny allowed the youth to approach and activate his aspect ability, staring at the warmonger they had just killed. This one was a bit of a challenge. The bastard had almost taken one of his arms off. The slavers they fought were growing stronger lately. Sonny tried to think, but his mind felt sluggish. Something is wrong. Sonny was not thinking about the warmongers. He was thinking about his own state. At the start of all this, he had been in very bad shape. Day after day, he had fought in the arena, receiving terrible wounds and being beaten down time after time, just to claw his way back to survival, somehow, and be thrown back into the cage. At first, he had kept his spirits high despite all the horror of his situation. He kept thinking and studying his surroundings, searching for a way to escape. He still had hope. But after a while, when nothing had worked, the weight of pain, torment, and hopelessness had grown heavier and heavier, and then heavier still. A seed of despair had taken root in his soul, and once there, it grew uncontrollably, threatening to break him into pieces. Sonny had not broken, but he had to search for a way to survive in the arena without losing pieces of his flesh each time, to bide his time until an opportunity to escape presented itself. He had found that way in Shadow Dance. The idea had been kept in the depths of his mind for a long time, but only now, faced with his soul-crushing despair, had Sonny summoned it into the light. He had decided to try and expand the purview of his battle style to include not only shadowing humans, but also nightmare creatures. The result was a resounding success. Armed with a demon's body, Sonny had found it surprisingly easy to peer into the very essence of how the mad abominations carried themselves in battle, how they used their monstrous bodies and vile abilities to tear, ravage, and obliterate everything in their path. And then, he had stolen it. He had claws, too. He had fangs and horns, too. He had plenty of hatred and cruelty burning in his heart, too. Not that having a demon's body mattered in the end. It was the willingness to shift the way he thought that was needed. Why couldn't he learn how to ravage, rip apart, and obliterate from these creatures? He had done exactly that, and slowly, his performance in the arena started to improve. Being able to shadow the nightmare creatures not only enhanced his battle style, but also made them more predictable, and thus less dangerous. Of course, the task had not been easy. Understanding how the corrupted fought and what impulses guided them was, in a sense, much harder than deciphering even the most sophisticated battle style. Their minds were perverted, bizarre, and alien to everything he had ever known. And yet, he had nothing else to do but practice, as if his life depended on it. Because it quite literally did. Eventually, his efforts bore fruit. Sonny couldn't quite remember when he had made a breakthrough, but at some point, he found himself being able to understand the nightmare creatures much better. From that point onward, his mastery of shadow dance, which had been stagnating since the Dreamscape tournament, finally started advancing once again, and with frightening speed. Now, Sonny was able to use shadow dance to assume the shape and form of all his enemies, at least in his mind, and thus know how they were going to try and destroy him. By knowing that, he had been able to anticipate and kill them first. Instead, one after another, day after day, week after week. And here he was, barely remembering who he was. As Elias healed his wounds, Sonny stared at the dead warmonger, his scowl growing deeper and deeper.
Am I becoming a nightmare creature?
The thought sent a cold shiver running down his spine. How did one become corrupted anyway? Sometime later, back in the cage, Sonny stared into the darkness, scared. This was not a danger he had anticipated. Thrust into the terrible meat grinder of the arena, he had been so focused on surviving the terrifying battles that the possibility of having his very self annihilated, piece by little piece, had never occurred to him. What exactly was happening to him? Sonny stared at the unbreakable bars of his cage and shuddered.
Damn, I really need to get out of here.
But how? He had been trying to escape all this time with not even a hint of a chance. The damned collar around his neck made sure that he would never be able to leave the Colosseum. His black eyes narrowed.
No, I have to hold on. Just a little longer. This madness is not going to last forever.
It simply couldn't. Half of the cages in the dungeon were already empty, their inhabitants slaughtered on the red stones of the arena. The warmongers were slowly running out of slaves to kill, and when their number decreased too much, with only the most ferocious and deadly monsters left, something was bound to happen. Wasn't it? A cold feeling of despair drowned his mind.
But what if it doesn't?
After a while, shrouded in darkness, Elias suddenly spoke, addressing Sonny in his usual one-sided manner. In the past weeks, the young awakened had developed a habit of sometimes speaking to his demonic partner, even though the frightening creature could not respond with anything more than an occasional nod, a shake of the head, or an indifferent shrug. Talking to Shadow was not much of a conversation. Sonny supposed he had very much done the same with his shadows. He had spent enough time alone to know that having something to talk to helped him get through the long stretches of quiet, even if that something never talked back. Perhaps this was one of the few things that was keeping him sane. Sonny could understand why the youth had to do that, since his own inability to talk was one of the things that was driving him mad. That was robbing him of even more of his humanity.
Hey, demon, do you think it's true about the wooden sword?
Sonny stared at the young man, then shrugged. He had no opinion on that topic since he didn't know what the wooden sword was. Elias sighed.
Before the warmongers captured us, I had heard of their cruel trials. Everyone back home has, really. The horrors of the Red Colosseum is something every parent tells their children, to make them behave.
That piqued Sonny's curiosity, though right now he was starving for anything to pull him out of his own insanity spiral. Perhaps Alius had more information about this strange land that could be useful. Maybe. He grew silent and then continued after some time, his voice even. But they also say that there is a way to escape this terrible place. If one is brave enough, if they are righteous enough, then they would eventually be given a wooden sword to earn the right to fight for their freedom. Sonny shifted slightly, tilting his head.
What a nice fairy tale.
The poor kid was deceiving himself if he thought that the worshippers of war were going to just let them go. Bravery, righteousness. These concepts were alien to the insane zealots. Or, rather, they understood it all differently. Sonny had spent enough time observing the warriors, or warmongers as Alius called them, to understand that they were not evil people, or at least did not consider themselves as such. Their worldview was twisted and ruthlessly cruel, but very simple. They believed in struggle and glory. One had to struggle to achieve glory, and the struggle itself was the most glorious thing. That was why they were happy. No, they were radiantly joyful when watching their new favorite, Sonny, though they referred to him as Shadow, slaughter his way through the arena, no matter who or what he was killing. Nightmare creatures, or the audience's own friends and family. Because dying while struggling against an overwhelming foe was the highest form of glory. Dying by his hand was a privilege and an expression of virtue. The only thing more righteous than being killed by a stronger enemy was to kill that enemy instead. In their mind, the warriors saw what they were doing to the slaves not as a cruel injustice, but as a benevolent gift. The slaves were not forced to slaughter each other for the entertainment of the crowd. Instead, they were generously given a chance to walk the path of righteousness and strive toward glory. That was why Sonny didn't think that any of the slaves would ever be allowed to walk free of the Colosseum. Doing so would be the greatest sin, a shameful offense that the warmongers in their perverse benevolence would never visit upon their prisoners. Because if they were free, then how would they strive towards glory? Who would they fight? To them, that would have been the vilest form of cruelty. How dare they remove someone from their struggle? How dare they prevent someone from entering the Colosseum to kill and kill again?
Damned lunatics.
Sonny was not sure that all followers of the war god were this bizarre. In fact, he was pretty certain that this murderous sect had been born here in the Kingdom of Hope. The slavers he had met in the first nightmare worshipped the same god, but were nothing like these battle-sworn zealots. At least, not that he remembered. They were cruel, but they seemed to have some sense of self-preservation. The Kingdom of Hope was a very strange place throughout, from what little he had gathered from Alius's words. Sonny now knew that he had been sent into a time period around 1,000 years after the destruction of the real kingdom by Sun God. Now, only the name remained. People inhabiting these lands did not even know who the Demon of Desire was. At least, not really. They only knew that she had been punished by the gods and imprisoned in the Ivory Tower, and that their duty was to guard her prison. In this duty, the people of the kingdom were led by 7 lords, or rather 5, since 2 had already perished by now. The Ivory Tower itself had not been separated from the rest of the isles yet. It remained at the center of the region, surrounded by a large city. The beautiful city of aerial bridges and white aqueducts that he had seen rebuild itself from ashes at the start of the nightmare. It was Alius's home. The Ivory City was populated by the followers of the Sun God and protected by 2 of the remaining 5 lords. The west of the region belonged to the second most populous faction of the Kingdom of Hope, the Followers of War, and this was where Sonny had the misfortune to find himself. He had seen the statues of War God here and there in the arena, even though they did not resemble the ones he had witnessed on the strange island that a circular river flowed through. These statues of the God of War, as well as of life, progress, technology, craft, intellect, and humanity, all depicted him as a mighty warrior in heavy armor, wielding a bloodied spear and a cracked shield. The warriors were also led by one of the lords, a beautiful priestess of war, whose name was Solvain. The dazzling beauty was one of the rulers of the Kingdom of Hope. The followers of War God and the Sun God seemed to be in conflict with each other, and so were the lords leading them. That was how Elias and his family had ended up captured and brought into the arena to serve as slaves, fighting in the trials. The remaining two lords were neutral and of no consequence, since their factions were much smaller and wielded no real power. One resided far off to the north, and the other somewhere in the east. Elias did not know much about them, and so Sonny didn't either. He just knew that the five lords were, without a doubt, the eternal shackles mentioned in the description of the Undying Chain. The immortal jailers were created by the Sun God to keep Hope imprisoned in her tower, chained forever. What had once been a suspicion of his now turned into a certainty. There were just too many clues, some of which he had collected before venturing into the Seed, and some that he had picked up from the young man's words. And maybe, just maybe, that knowledge could help him gain freedom.
Wooden sword. Fight for their freedom.
Sonny shifted slightly, causing his cage to sway, and glanced at Elias. The youth was no longer in a talking mood, instead, just sitting quietly, staring into the darkness. There was something, a hint of a meaning, in what he had said. Sonny tried desperately to catch that meaning, but for some reason, his thoughts kept returning to the statues of the War God. He had seen two depictions of the fearsome deity in the Kingdom of Hope. One was a warrior in heavy armor, wielding a bloodied spear and a cracked shield, both presumably representing warfare and battle, and the other was a woman wearing nothing but a beast hide around her waist, holding a spear in one hand and a beating human heart in another. The spear representing her dominion over war, technology, and craft, perhaps. The heart representing her connection to life and humanity. Why were these statues so different? Sonny was still exhausted after the furious battles of the past day. His thoughts, slow and feverish, as they often were recently. Frustrated, he rubbed his face, then scratched at it with sharp claws, slicing the skin apart. The pain washed the fog surrounding his mind away, allowing him to think clearly for a few minutes. The altar of war. That was what Solvain had called the island, where the primeval statue of the goddess of life stood. And that was the right word. This depiction of the deity seemed much more primal, bestial, ancient. The statue itself seemed incredibly ancient too. At least, it was much older than the statues of the mighty warrior were. In fact, it seemed as ancient as the Red Colosseum itself, or perhaps even older. Old enough to have been created before the Kingdom of Hope was shattered and turned into the chain of floating islands by the Sun God, as it was today, and would be thousands of years into the future. Why would Hope have a monument to one of the gods in her domain? Well, the idea itself was not that strange. Gods and daemons had not always been at war, after all. In fact, the prince of the underworld had a shrine to the goddess of the black skies, Storm God, in his very tower, despite the fact that later she would become his mortal enemy. The gods and daemons, perhaps, had shifting loyalties, shifting power dynamics, and perhaps shifting and ever-changing relationships. So that question was not important, at least, not really. The important thing was that Sunny couldn't stop thinking about the statue, for some reason.
As ancient as the Red Colosseum itself.
Suddenly, Sunny tilted his head.
Huh?
The white amphitheater and the arena it surrounded were the derelict of the true Kingdom of Hope as well. He had realized that fact a while back, partially from how they looked, and partially from how deep and ancient some of the shadows hiding in the corners of the dungeon felt. In fact, Sunny suspected that the theater had not always been a battle arena. It reminded him of how the giant quarry at the roots of the Hollow Mountains, where the 7 heroes of the Forgotten Shore had excavated stone to build the mighty walls of their city, and the Crimson Spire itself. But what utility did it have before? Was it a mine? Was there something here? The Ivory City had to have been built out of something too. So, this place must have been a similar quarry once, and had served as the source of the white stones used to construct those aerial bridges and aqueducts. Later, it had been turned into a theater, and later still, the warmongers usurped that theater and made it into an arena, soaking the ancient stones with so much blood that they turned red. His black eyes narrowed.
This is it. This must be it.
All this time, Sunny had been tormented by one paradoxical question. A question that was of utmost importance for his attempts to gain freedom. If this was an era where the nightmare spell did not exist yet, then how could the spell even send him here? Could it reach beyond its creation in time? And how could Solvayne put him on a leash capable of severing his connection to the spell? The collar was a simple piece of enchanted metal, with no lock or any other way of opening it. It was almost impossible to damage or destroy, but the enchantment itself was not very complicated. Sunny could feel that it wasn't. What it did, however, was tie him to the vast and incredibly powerful enchantments of the arena itself. Those enchantments were harnessed by the warmongers to maintain the cages, prevent the slaves from escaping by any means, mundane or magical, and ensure that they behaved while being transported to, and very rarely back, from the arena. His inability to connect to the spell almost seemed like a side effect of these measures. But what could even interfere with the spell, let alone accidentally? The spell seemed to reach beyond space and time. And now, he felt as if he had found the answer. If the Red Colosseum was, indeed, not built by the warriors, but only usurped by them, then it was indeed very clear. What could have built this Colosseum was, perhaps, the sorcery of another daemon. If the Demon of Desire was the original creator of the theater, then the enchantments left behind by her would probably do the job of messing with the spell weaved from the strings of fate by her older sibling. Sunny shifted, grasping the bars of the cage. Suddenly, a powerful emotion burst in his chest, filling his muscles with renewed strength and his mind with desperate resolve. Hope. It was hope. He didn't think of it as a poison anymore. No, it was the opposite. A most powerful antidote. It was giving him strength. The clouds in his mind were beginning to part, and he could see a glimmer of light starting to form at the end of this tunnel of despair. If the spell had been created by Weaver, and the enchantments interfering with it created by Hope, if all of it was the result of a clash between two types of demonic sorcery, then why couldn't he, as an inheritor of a demonic legacy, do something to resolve that clash? Sure, Sunny knew nothing about weaving magic, but he had also not known anything about combat once, or how to live and fight in the body of an actual demon. Sunny had managed to rise up from the dirt and grime of the outskirts, fight through his first nightmare, and fight against all of the odds. The odds were always against him, but he had continued to fight. He destroyed combatants and foes that were significantly more powerful than he was, and he won. He kept going. Why? Because if there was one thing he was good at, it was learning new things. Well, that, and lying, and staying alive. Staring at the ghastly dungeon surrounding him with new eyes, Sunny studied its ancient stone walls and frowned. So, how was one supposed to start learning sorcery? There were hours left until they were going to be taken to the arena again. Sunny stared at the walls of the dungeon intently, as though hoping to glean some secrets from the ancient stones. But what could he see? They were just old stones. There was nothing interesting on the stone surface, and neither was there anything interesting beneath it. After a while, Sunny took a deep breath and sat down again, trying to make himself as comfortable as possible in the narrow cage. Then, he shut down his senses, pushing away the presence of countless abominations surrounding him, the stench of the prison, the pain in his exhausted body, everything that distracted him from thinking.
What do I know about sorcery?
That was a daunting question. Even the word itself was deceptive. Humans of his world used it to describe any aspect capable of dealing direct damage to the opponents, as opposed to augmenting the Awakened's combat ability, especially those that could do so from range. But that wasn't what Sunny was after. No, what he was interested in was not the type of abilities that existed within the familiar framework of supernatural powers, but the very means used to create that framework, or at least those that existed outside the realm of aspects. That, to him, was true sorcery.
But there are different kinds of such sorcery as well. What are the ones that I've witnessed?
3 came to mind. The first one he was familiar with the best, the spell weave, which he believed to be Weaver's own sorcery. The spell itself was created from it, as well as all the magical items that the spell gifted to the Awakened, memories and echoes. This was the magic that all humans knew, and most believed to be the only kind there is. Sunny, however, had already learned that sorcery was not synonymous with the spell, and that there were ways of creating magic different from spellweave. The first of them he had witnessed inside the Echo of the Saint, which had remnants of a much more primitive weave hiding beneath the usual pattern of ethereal strings before he turned her into a shadow. Later, he encountered the same type of alien weave within the walls of the Ebony Tower. This type of sorcery belonged to the Prince of the Underworld, the Weaver's younger sibling. The similarity between them was hard not to notice, but Sunny didn't know which of the daemons had copied which, whether the Weaver perfected the sorcery created by their brother, or whether the youngest child of the Unknown had based the method of his craft on the eldest's invention. Judging by these two types of sorcery, it was easy to imagine that all of them involved some kind of a weave. However, that conclusion would have been wrong. Sunny knew this because of the third type of magic he had encountered, the miraculous creation of the sun god. The obsidian knife he had taken from the white altar of the sanctuary of Noctis before leaving for the night temple, and was now resting, inaccessible, on the bottom of the covetous coffer. The black knife had no weave hiding beneath its surface. Instead, it was full of blinding radiance, as if encompassing a boundless ocean of soul essence, with a single string of fate placed into the pristine light as it folded on itself endlessly and formed a never-ending circle. That was the sorcery of the sun god. If a deific miracle could even be called sorcery. In any case, the obsidian knife, and later, the wooden one he had used to kill Solvayne, proved that one didn't have to base their magic on a weave of some sort. This was just the unique way Weaver cast his, and their brother followed. So, Hope's sorcery might have been completely unique too. Trapped in the iron cage, Sunny frowned. How was he supposed to search for something that could have looked like anything? Come to think of it, there was another type of sorcery that he had encountered, or rather, several different ones, all united by the same method of creation: runic magic. The first time he had seen it was underneath the ruined citadel of the Dark City, in a small cell where a corpse wearing the Weaver's mask had been chained with a broken circle. That circle was carved into the stone floor, surrounded by countless symbols that Sunny had not recognized. The gateway within the Crimson Spire was surrounded by a circle of runes too, as well as the stone arch on the last level of the Ebony Tower and the one connected to it, situated in the beautiful white gazebo on the Ivory Island. Another place where he had encountered sorcerous runes was the Night Temple. There, they had been either inscribed by someone from Clan Valor, or at least found and repurposed by them. So, basically, he was familiar with three general types of creating sorcery. One was the spell weave, as well as a version of it used by the prince of the underworld. The other was the divine miracles of the sun god, which he couldn't even begin to understand. And the last one was based on the inscription of runes and seemed to have been mostly used by humans. Here in the Kingdom of Hope, and on the neighboring Forgotten Shore. Luckily for Sunny, he had spent so much time with Teacher Julius, and on his own, studying the runes. He could read the modern ones of his time period, and many older ones. He was by no means fluent in the ancient texts, but still, he could make more sense of them than most of his classmates ever could. Could he make enough sense of them to wield them? If he simply carved them into stone, would anything happen? He knew there was likely more to it, but he felt closer than ever to having figured something out. The cage started to feel a little less suffocating and a little less constraining. Maybe he could find his way out, and maybe, just maybe, he would help Elias out too. There was a small discrepancy, however. Why was the portal in the Ebony Tower created with runic magic instead of the primitive spell weave like everything else in there? Was it perhaps because the connecting portal on the Ivory Island had been? The prince of the underworld had built the tower in the sky below long after Hope had built hers, after all. In fact, he had done so after his sister was already imprisoned, to harvest the divine flames that had destroyed her domain. It would have made sense for him to use runic magic to invade an already existing system of portals that had been based on it. So, Was Hope perhaps the source of runic magic? Or at least a user of it? Sonny sighed, feeling spent and tired, then closed his eyes. He had to sleep at least a little, to allow his body and mind some rest before tomorrow's battles, especially now that he not only had to survive them, but also do so while searching for any sign of hidden runes throughout the arena. A new day brought with it a new heaping of pain, hardship, and despair. Sonny and Alias were dragged into the arena, the same ascended warmonger guiding them by the chains attached to the collars. Sonny stumbled forward, his gaze locked on the man's broad back. The jailer was incredibly tall for a human, his height more than even the shadow demon body Sonny was currently inhabiting. His figure was solemn and powerful, a sense of terrifying strength radiating from it in almost physical waves. The Apostle of War wore the same ragged leather armor and a tattered red robe, his features hidden behind a deep hood. In all these weeks, Sonny had never seen his face or heard him speak. The great blade on the ascended warrior's back looked special too. It was enchanted with very powerful magic. Now that Sonny turned his thoughts to the nature of sorcery, he was silently studying the line of runes inscribed along the edge of the heavy weapon.
Runic magic again.
That made sense. How else were these ancient people supposed to enchant their weapons? It was not like they could rely on memories and spellweave. That said, magical weapons seemed to be much rarer in the Kingdom of Hope than in the waking world. Most of the awakened that Sonny had fought in the arena wielded either mundane blades or weapons possessing weak, primitive enchantments. It was a far cry from the powerful memories he was used to, although Sonny did not know if that was the nature of this era or just another sign of the ubiquitous regression that seemed to reign in what remained of the Kingdom of Hope. Everything here seemed devolved, worn out, and on the verge of falling apart. The whole region was obviously in decline and had been for some time now. While studying the runes on the Great Blade, he also noticed that it had a few new nicks. The leather armor of the silent giant had more scratches than before as well. It seemed that the Ascendant was participating in the battles in the arena himself.
I guess I'll have to fight that monster too, eventually.
Finally, a rusty iron gate appeared in front of them, blinding sunlight streaming through its bars. The rumbling voices of the crowd echoed from the stone walls, washing over him like a cursed tide. The gate swung open, and the chains came off their collars. Sonny and Elias entered the first killing box and watched as their opponents crawled out of a similar tunnel. The young awakened brandished his weapon, a short spear fashioned out of a long, twisting horn, and forced out a weak smile.
Luck is on our side today, demon. These creatures are called burrowers. On solid stone, their main advantage is gone. Just don't let them swallow you.
Sonny snarled, then dashed forward with a roar. Hard. Today was going to be hard. He was forced to use Shadow Dance to peer into the souls of the nightmare creatures, despite suspecting that doing so too much threatened to destroy his already unsteady mind. He also had to both concentrate on the fight and thoroughly study the ancient theater in hopes of discovering signs of Hope sorcery. It was almost like his first training sessions with the Saint when he had to resist the taciturn monster while simultaneously keeping an eye on his shadow to decipher the secret of its dance. The problem was that back then, he had ended up beaten black and blue by Saint most of the time. Now, He couldn't allow himself to lose. Sonny descended upon the repulsive burrowers, which looked like sacks of bulbous flesh, with giant circular maws gaping in them, and tried to slaughter the abominations without being eaten alive. The first fight came and went, and then it was time for the second one, and then the third one, and then the fourth. Sonny had slain the vicious burrowers, and then a creature that resembled a giant walking skeleton, its bones green and as tough as granite, and then a swarm of monstrous ants that covered the floor of the arena like a carpet, and then a being that was like an oozing mountain of mire sludge that had long, razor-sharp steel sickles protruding from it. His body was torn and sliced and crushed and gnawed on. Elias had healed the most terrible wounds, but the rest remained, not worthy of having precious soul essence wasted on them. Sonny was once again overwhelmed by pain, rage, and the desperate need to fight for his survival. Everything else disappeared. The only thing that remained was battle, blood, and murder. And fear. However, today, that wasn't enough. He fought through the battle fog that encompassed his mind and kept searching, studying every corner of the Red Colosseum, the floor of the arena, the walls surrounding it, the rows of seats rising above, in search of intricately engraved runes. But all he saw were the statues of the war god, the jubilant faces of the spectators, and the weathered surface of ancient stones. There was no hint of any engravings anywhere.
Where are you? Where?
The fifth battle almost cost him his life. While fighting against a familiar foe, a giant worm-like creature that possessed a seemingly endless reserve of vitality, Sonny had tripped on the uneven surface of the floor of the arena, lost his balance, and tumbled down. If not for Elias, who fearlessly jumped forward and pulled the attention of the terrible abomination to himself, he would have been viciously mauled, or even lost his life. Back when Sonny had fought a worm like that for the first time, the creature eventually succumbed to the soul damage continuously dealt to it by the cruel sight. Today, however, he had no deadly memory to help him, only his claws, his fangs, and his horns. In the end, Sonny had to literally rip the giant abomination to shreds. Only when its body was torn apart completely did the worm stop regenerating new flesh and recovering from all the wounds and finally die. Exhausted, Sonny fell to his knees and breathed hoarsely. Then threw a hateful glance at the crowd chanting his name. Finally, he lowered his head and glared at the wide groove in the red stone of the arena that had almost cost him his life. There were several grooves like that in some of the killing boxes, cutting through the floor of the Colosseum like broad channels meant for the rivers of blood to flow through them. Usually he took note of their placement in advance to avoid losing his footing at a dire moment, but today, with his attention split between the battles and the need to study the arena, Sonny had failed in that regard.
Damn thing. Why couldn't they just make the arena flat?
Well, the answer was obvious. All that blood had to go somewhere, and if not for these grooves, the whole Colosseum would have slowly turned into one giant crimson pool. He frowned.
Wait, that doesn't make sense though.
Sonny lingered, noticing that the gate to the sixth box was already opening. The grooves were as ancient as the Red Colosseum itself, which meant that they had been here long before the warmongers started holding their demented trials here. Long before the name Red Colosseum was even given to it, which meant that these grooves had been cut through the stone back when it had still been pristine white and had no blood spilled on it. So, serving as channels that took away blood could not have been their purpose. Sonny's lightless eyes narrowed. Suddenly, he realized his mistake. All this time, he had been looking for the sorceress runes while expecting them to look like they had the previous times he encountered them. Intricate, small, and numerous, arranged into shapes and patterns. And yet, he had found nothing. But in fact, the runes were right in front of him the whole time. Or rather, beneath his feet. He was just too small and insignificant to notice them, like an ant crawling across a vast painting and failing to see the whole image for what it was. There were no circles of intricate runes carved anywhere in the Colosseum. Instead, the whole vastness of the ancient arena was a runic circle, a canvas Hope had used to create her sorcery. He was standing on it. The runes Hope had used were not small, intricate, or elaborate. Instead, they were giant, spanning the whole width of the blood-soaked arena, guiding torrential floods of soul energy instead of thin streams of it to create unimaginably powerful enchantments. Once Sonny knew where to look, it didn't take him long to start noticing a pattern and meaning in the placement and direction of the grooves cut in the ancient stone. The problem was, their scope was too great to be perceived from the floor of the arena. He would have been able to see the entirety of the runes, perhaps, from the very top of the amphitheater. But fighters were never allowed to leave the battlefield, not unless it was to return to the dungeon. In the absence of an aerial view, all he could do was try and compile the disjointed pieces of the puzzle in his mind. By now, Sonny had fought in most of the killing boxes in the arena except for a few. After defeating another group of warmongers and being thrown back into the cage, he spent the entire night trying to remember each of the stages he had shed blood on and the pattern of the grooves on their floor. It was like assembling a complicated puzzle, only instead of the actual pieces, all he had were fragmented memories of them. Luckily, his memory had always been good. In fact, after becoming an awakened and having the opportunity to interact with a lot of different people, many of whom were very smart and educated, Sonny realized that his ability to instantly memorize things was somewhat unnatural. Before, he had just assumed that everyone could do the same. Still, he had to have paid attention to a thing in order to remember it, which was not the case with all of the grooves. Only those that had happened to appear in his way. Plus, he was also having trouble determining how the irregularly shaped killing boxes were situated in relation to each other, since that wasn't something he had thought about before. The task of creating a perfect three-dimensional replica of the entire arena in his mind was not an easy one. Over the next few days, he was somewhat distracted while fighting the nightmare creatures in the Red Colosseum, confounded by the fact that their enemies were growing stronger and stronger as all the weaker slaves were being slowly slaughtered. His performance suffered, and that meant more injuries, more pain, and more torment. Sometimes, he felt utterly beaten, broken and hopeless. Sonny was familiar with suffering and hardship and had experienced a fair share of horrific anguish in his life. But the trial of the Red Colosseum had turned out to be a hell so dire that even he was having difficulty enduring its burden. It was simply too cruel, too odious, too vile. And that harrowing torture was not going to end until he gave up. But he didn't. The strange task of peering into the secrets of the demon of desire kept him going, no matter how wounded his body and how broken his spirit became. It was almost like an obsession. Sonny continued to fight and kill and suffer, and study the ancient stones. His mental condition deteriorated so much that even Elias, who was going through his own terrible ordeal, noticed that something was very wrong with his taciturn demonic partner. The young man tried to encourage the shadow creature as well as he could, but what could he say to soothe the soul-crushing despair of their situation? They were enslaved, locked in cages, and forced to fight for their lives against a swarm of deadly monsters, only to be thrown back behind the iron bars, fed the raw flesh of the abominations they had just killed, and go through the whole nightmare again the next day, with no hope of ever escaping, except through death, through being killed and eaten by the other prisoners of the Red Colosseum. Even their captors seemed to be trapped by the Colosseum, chained in the same vicious cycle and doomed to eventually share the same fate as their slaves. Inside this ancient theater, only bloodshed and madness reigned. And yet, all of it was not for nothing. Eventually, after Sonny had lost count of the days they had spent in the Colosseum, he finally managed to create a complete image of it in his head. With it came the understanding of the shapes of the giant runes that were cut in the blood-soaked stone. And with that understanding came the ability to peer into their purpose. After learning the shape and position of the runes, Sonny found himself able to peer beneath the surface of the stone and see their function. The ability had always been within him, hiding in the depths of his changed eyes. He just had not known where and how to look, like he had not been aware of his ability to see the soul cores of creatures before clashing with Mordret within the Soul Sea. Armed with the new knowledge, Sonny was able to perceive vast rivers of soul essence flowing beneath the arena and through its walls, following intricate paths carved for it by the immense runes. In the end, that was what sorcery was, the ability to guide and shape hidden energies, most often that of souls, to express one's will upon the world. The enchantments were simply expressions of the enchanter's will, and the runes were the building blocks with which the enchanter manipulated the movement of energy to achieve their goal. But where was all this soul energy coming from? At first, Sonny assumed that the Red Colosseum was similar to the Crimson Labyrinth and fed on the souls of creatures slain within it. Slaves slaughtering each other in the arena must have been empowering the sorcery enslaving them by the very act of slaughter. But after observing the flow of soul essence through the ancient structure for a while, he realized that his initial theory was wrong. Instead of the fighters, it was the crowd of spectators that fueled the enchantments. It was their jubilation, their elation, their sincere excitement that was the source of all the power flowing through the ancient theater. Of course, why would the demon of desire base her sorcery on death? Her domain was built upon dreams, emotions, and passion. It was only after the followers of War God had usurped the Colosseum that the subject of all this passion became battle, bloodshed, and murder. The current state of the arena was not how it had been supposed to be. It was stolen, perverted, and made into something utterly different. Corrupted. More than a month had already passed after Sonny entered the second nightmare. The dungeon was growing less and less crowded, most of the prisoners long killed on the bloody stones of the arena. The end of the hateful trials, whatever it was supposed to be, was approaching. Now, he knew the basic principle of how the enchantments keeping him tied to the Red Colosseum functioned. So, the question was, how was he supposed to use that knowledge to escape? Sonny had no clue how to create, decipher or manipulate runic magic. His inherent ability to see the weave and inner structure of magical items, the one he had received after consuming the drop of ichor that fell from the weaver's eye, also gifted him with an innate understanding of the essence of spellweave. But for now, that wasn't super helpful. At least, it wasn't yet. While studying the memories created by the spell, Sunny was not able to fully understand the intricate purpose of the vast patterns of ethereal strings, but he at least could intuitively feel a hint of it. He had no such advantage when it came to other forms of sorcery, so, despite the fact that he had managed to perceive the enchantments encompassing the Red Colosseum, it was not like he could simply change them or create new ones to counteract the old. He could study the runes, of course, but with no teacher, he only had his wit and intelligence to help him draw the correct conclusions from observing various enchantments. It would likely take him hundreds of years to gain enough insight to learn how to create any meaningful runic sorcery on his own. Sunny, however, wasn't discouraged. Yes, he would not be able to create runic sorcery anytime soon, but destroying things was always much easier than making them. Locked inside the narrow cage, surrounded by the smell of nightmare creatures and filth, Sunny stared into the darkness and thought, destroy the enchantments of the Red Colosseum. In theory, it was a simple objective to achieve. He just had to break enough runes to disrupt the paths they created for the soul energy. The problem with that, however, was that the runes Hope had used were gigantic and carved into nearly unbreakable stone. Sunny doubted that he would be able to do enough damage to the arena to cause its sorcery to fail. Causing a smaller and temporary disruption, however, was not entirely impossible. He felt that he would be able to achieve that much at least, perhaps enough to free himself of the binding enchantment for a second or two. But would several seconds of freedom be enough to escape this cursed place? It was going to have to be. As he waited in the darkness, a seed of a desperate plan started forming in his mind. At some point, Sunny straightened and sat cross-legged at the center of the cage, causing it to sway slightly. Raising one of his 4 monstrous hands, he stared at it for a while, and then commanded shadow essence to stream forward, concentrating it at the tips of his fingers. Ever since he had consumed the weaver's alabaster phalanx and acquired the bone weave, the tactile sense of his fingers went through a strange metamorphosis. It was now much more nuanced, vibrant, and keen. Even though his hands were currently bestial and covered by thick calluses, this sensitivity remained. As shadow essence concentrated in the tips of his fingers, he felt a strange ghostly tingling sensation. It was so real as to almost appear physical. Tentatively raising another hand, Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then pinched the air near one of his tingling fingers and tried to pull essence outward. To his surprise, it worked. In his mind's eye, a strand of darkness suddenly extended into the air, summoned by his hand. It didn't look like one of the radiant strings he was used to seeing inside memories, and neither did it look like the flowing liquid that essence was usually depicted as. Instead, the strand of shadow essence looked like a tenebrous fog, similar to the gray wisps that rose from Saint's armor when one of the shadows wrapped itself around her. It was insubstantial, ephemeral, and elusive, not at all like the sharp and beautiful strings that the spellweave was created of. Sunny frowned slightly and pulled the fog with one hand while trying to get a hold of it with the other, wishing to draw it taut and thus more concentrated. However, this small movement instantly caused the strand to break, dissipate, and disappear, blown away by a gust of wind.
This is going to take some time.
Grim, Sunny continued to draw on his shadow essence and try to form it into a thin and durable string, emptying a small portion of his reserves with each failure. By the time morning came, he had not made any progress at all, and only managed to waste most of his essence in futile attempts. Fighting, after wasting so much power, was going to cost him a lot. Soon, the ascended jailer appeared from the darkness, chains rattling on his belt. Sunny glanced at the giant in a tattered red robe, and then closed his eyes for a moment.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'll be dead either way. But now, at least there's a chance.
He fought in the arena, killed the nightmare creatures, retrieved the soul shard to empower Elias, and then barely survived in the battle against the awakened warriors on the final stage. At night, he continued to experiment with shadow essence, trying to shape the elusive fog into something resembling an ethereal, resilient string. When his essence ran dry, he slept for a few minutes, and then woke up with a startle to start all over again. When the morning came, he fought. When the murder was over and done with, hidden in the darkness, he tried to weave strings out of the effervescent fog. The idea itself seemed ridiculous, mad, and impossible. How could something so intangible become something strong, durable, and distinct? He sundered flesh and had his flesh sundered, then struggled to create something out of nothing, day after day, night after day. Time lost any meaning. Sunny had already been struggling to hold on, but now, drained by the lack of sleep, the constant pressure of trying to shape essence into a magical string, and the need to fight in the arena with his reserves half empty because of it, he was slowly sliding into the dark and bottomless abyss. And yet, he persisted in his obsession, teaching his fingers to feel the smallest fluctuations of the fog, to guide and shape it, trying one approach after another, endlessly, without resting or giving up. And by the time his second month in the Red Colosseum was coming to an end, and most of the cages in the lightless dungeon hung empty, Sunny suddenly straightened, staring at his cut, trembling hands. Between them, a single ethereal string hovered, black as night, thinner than a hair, and as sharp as a diamond blade. A low growl escaped from his mouth.
It's done. I've done it.
Sunny remained motionless for a while, then shifted slightly, causing the chain of his cage to rattle. Attracted by the sound, Elias woke up from his restless sleep and stared into the darkness, a tired expression on his young face.
Demon? What happened?
In the next moment, he heard the sound of a heavy body slamming against the iron bars, and then another crash. His partner's cage swung widely, and at the highest point of its swing, a long arm suddenly shot from between the bars, claws scraping against metal, as Sunny took hold of the youth's own gibbet. Elias flinched.
What are you doing?
Sunny growled, trying to express his intention as best as he could. The young awakened didn't know how to read the runic language he knew how to write, so this was the only way of communication between them. Luckily, an honest effort to answer truthfully was enough for the flaw. It didn't punish Sonny for not being able to deliver the truth as long as he really tried to. Their cages hung diagonally, connected by his hand. Sonny groaned, straining his muscles to pull them even closer together. Then, staring at the young man's pale face, Sonny took hold of the bars with 2 more hands and stretched the 4th one to grab the awakened by the throat. Elias's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't even try to struggle. The youth simply looked at him, no fear written on his gaunt, emaciated, yet childishly soft face. Instead, there was only confusion and trust. Sonny sighed.
What a fool. If I wanted to, I could have snapped his neck right here and now.
Of course, he had no such intentions. Instead, Sonny brought the youth closer and stared intently at the steel collar wrapped around his neck, studying it. He couldn't really see his own, so this was the next best thing. Elias remained motionless for a while, then said,
I don't know what you are trying to do, demon, but you'd better stop it before the priest comes to check on the noise.
Sonny scowled, then let go, causing their cages to swing away from each other. Elias was right. There were just seconds left before the Ascended showed up, judging by how long it had taken the solemn giant to appear before. He was always somewhere nearby, ready to intervene in case the slaves misbehaved. Sonny had timed their jailer's reactions many times, so he knew that much. It didn't matter anyway. He had already seen all that he needed to see. The pattern of runes carved inside the collar and the stream of soul essence running through it. This was what he needed to disrupt. Sonny was going to have to work fast. Several days later, looking more like a corpse than a living being, he was laying at the bottom of the cage, looking at his hands. Between them, a complicated cradle of black strings was weaved together, forming a strange and hypnotic pattern. Sonny had advanced a lot in his ability to thread shadow strings and loop them between his fingers. Sadly, it was not without cost. The strings were ephemeral and unseen to anyone except him, which also meant that they could not interact with the material world. However, they could interact with his flesh, which was why 2 of his fingers were missing, each sliced away so cleanly that it seemed as though they had never existed. Even his phalanxes, reinforced by the evolved bone weave, had not offered the essence strings any resistance. All that remained were 2 bloody stumps. The rest of his fingers were cut and mangled, but still in place. Considering that there were 18 of them left, he still had more than a human would. Not that it diminished the pain he was constantly experiencing. It would have certainly been helpful to have a tool to work the black strings instead of doing it with his bare hands. Something like a needle, perhaps. Coincidentally, he had one of those in his possession. A needle, used by the Weaver themselves, no less. But it was locked away in his soul sea, safely kept and utterly inaccessible inside the covetous coffer. So, he just had to endure and be very, very careful, lest the number of his fingers diminished even further. There was another problem, though. Sonny had inherited an intuitive understanding of the guiding principles of the spellweave, but it was not like he really knew what to do. All he had was his memory of the spellweave patterns he had seen before, and a vague feeling of the purpose behind them. This was not enough to master sorcery, but it was at least a start. Each memory he had studied before had unique enchantments, so he couldn't draw parallels between them and extrapolate how their weaves produced the desired effects. There were magical qualities that all memories shared, however. The ability to be summoned and dismissed, the ability to repair themselves unless completely destroyed, and the connection to the owner's soul. Knowing these three ubiquitous traits, Sunny could, in theory, determine which parts of the weave were the exact same across all memories, and thus were responsible for these effects. Then, he could try to recreate them. Each spell weave was incredibly complex, so recalling even a single pattern perfectly was a challenge, despite his picture-perfect memory. Sunny, however, had to recall not only many, but also do so with a sufficient degree of precision to be able to compare and find similarities between them. And then, he had to somehow rebuild the repeating parts of those weaves with nothing but his bare hands and shallow reserves of shadow essence. The task seemed nearly impossible. But fueled by obsession, resolve, and desperation, he had succeeded. And also failed. After thousands of attempts, Sunny was finally able to perfectly recreate one of the three patterns he had managed to isolate. But as soon as the pattern was complete, it instantly fell apart. No matter how many times he repeated the process, the result was the same. For some reason, the weave didn't hold. It wasn't able to sustain itself. Something was missing. Today, Sunny was going to perform another experiment. Perhaps the last one. He was tired, drained, and terribly hurt. Whatever hope he had managed to find before in this blood-soaked hell was on the verge of running out. He was almost ready to give up, but not just yet. There was one other thing that all memories contained, not a part of the pattern of ethereal strings, but something different, a bright ember that served as the anchor and nexus for the strings, a point around which the whole pattern was structured. Memories of the first tier had one, and those of the higher tiers had several. After considering that fact, Sunny had brought something back from the arena today, a single soul shard that he had not given to Elias, instead keeping it for himself. The shard had belonged to a fearsome awakened demon he killed earlier today in one of the killing boxes of the Red Colosseum. Now, looking at the cat's cradle of ethereal black strings drawn between his fingers, he hesitated for a long time, and then carefully placed the gleaming crystal in its center. Then, holding his breath, Sunny slowly started connecting each of the strings to the shard, moving his fingers with extreme speed and nimbleness. Slowly, a black pattern started shaping around the bright ember, strangely not permeating a different object, but instead looping back on itself. And after something that felt like an eternity, with drops of blood rolling down his hands, Sunny finally let go of the strings and stared at the soul shard laying in his palm. A beautiful pattern of tenumbrious strings hovered in the air around it, stable, without a single flaw or weakness to cause it to fall apart. He sighed, and then weaved the last string into the pattern, connecting its other end to the shadow core in his chest. Finally, Sunny closed his eyes and gave the mental command. In front of him, the soul shard disintegrated into a rain of white sparks, and then appeared once again, creating itself out of nothingness. Sunny let out a long, heavy breath. This was the first sorcery he had woven. Sunny breathed in, then breathed out, calming down his wildly beating heart. His hands were trembling so hard that the softly gleaming soul shard almost fell out of his grip.
Hey, Elias, look! It's finished!
He tiredly turned his head and let out a low growl, trying to attract the young man's attention. But his partner did not even move, laying at the bottom of his cage and staring into the darkness with bleak, hollow eyes. The last few days, the youth's condition hadn't been good. He stopped having his one-sided conversations with Sonny and just sat quietly in the darkness, not moving, until the next morning came and it was time to fight again. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then turned away.
It's all right. Rest. I'll get us out of here soon. We will be free. Free, Elias. Just hold on a little longer.
There wasn't much time left. In all the vile dungeon, barely 4 dozen nightmare creatures were left alive. Their grotesque forms towered in the darkness, locked inside enchanted cages, the long stretches of empty space between, hinting that the trials of the Red Colosseum were going to come to an end soon. And then, Solvain and her followers would spend another decade hunting down a new hecatomb of monsters to sacrifice to their bloodthirsty god. Sonny's mouth twitched.
Who cares? They are all just illusions anyway. The real Solvain is long dead. The real Elias is dead too. Who cares what happens to them?
He stole a glance at the crestfallen youth, and then looked away. But were they really? Forcing his trembling hands to grow steady, Sonny hesitated, then studied the soul shard he had just enchanted. He didn't know what the spell used to create the embers serving as anchors for its weaves. Whatever it was, there certainly was a connection to soul cores. After all, the tier and subsequently the number of nexuses a memory's spellweave possessed was directly tied to the number of soul cores that the source of the memory had. However, those embers weren't actual soul shards most likely, since shards were harvested from the carcasses of nightmare creatures even if the kill had produced a memory. Sonny didn't care though. Without a better alternative, all he could do was use one in place of the other. He steadied himself, looked upon his demonic figure through the eyes of the shadow, and then dismissed the soul shard once again. This time, however, Sonny did something strange. He willed the enchanted crystal to remain in an ambivalent state, not quite gone, but also not quite tangible. Then, he reached into the weave of the black strings and slowly untangled it, breaking the loops and allowing the ends of the tenumbrous threads to float free. And finally, after that was done, he started to weave the whole pattern, including the ethereal soul shard, into the cold steel of his collar. Slowly, but surely, he integrated the spellweave into the band wrapped around his neck, submerging it into the flowing stream of soul essence. The task was tenuous, perplexing, and intricate, but it wasn't too complicated. The pattern was already made, and all he had to do was to connect it to a new vessel. After a while, he was finished. The soul shard disappeared from his hands and from the material world entirely. Instead, it was now burning beneath the surface of the collar, the black strings extending from it and spreading through the steel. Now, the collar looked almost like a memory, and even its nexus was almost indistinguishable from the embers Sonny had seen before. Of course, there was a second enchantment inside of it. This one, much more complex and elaborate, crafted from ethereal runes. It was all a proper mess, just like he wanted it to be. Sonny held his breath and then tried to dismiss the collar. The band of metal around his neck shimmered and suddenly turned extremely cold. Inside, two energies clashed with each other, both enchantments momentarily failing. He felt the sudden shift, a sudden change in the air, and inside of him, as though a long-forgotten part of his being had awakened from a long slumber. Full of fear and excitement, Sonny did something that he had done countless times before, but never knew to value.
1,
He summoned the runes.
2,
Familiar symbols appeared in the air in front of him. Their sight was as sweet as honey. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Awakened.
3,
Sonny turned away from the runes and peered into the collar, observing the battle of the two enchantments within. Simultaneously, he grabbed the steel with two of his hands and threw all of his monstrous strength into trying to pull it apart.
4, 5, 6.
But the collar held firm, as if utterly indestructible.
7.
On the count of 7, the soul shard he had placed within the band of steel suddenly burst into a myriad of sparks, and the weave of black strings he had so arduously threaded fell apart, turning into the gray fog and disappearing. The original flow of soul essence was unobstructed once again, and the runic enchantment resumed its function. Sonny was not disappointed, for now, all he wanted was to learn how long his sabotage was going to last.
7 seconds.
A dark grin appeared on his face.
7 seconds will be more than enough.
The next day, hurting and barely alive, he brought another soul shard back with him from the arena. Tonight was going to be the night of their escape. Sonny wasn't sure that he would be able to endure any longer. If he had any chance to break free, he had to take it now. The plan was long finalized in his mind, and even though he was frightened to put it in motion, there was no other way. As Elias fell on the bottom of his cage and closed his eyes, too tired to eat the disgusting raw meat thrown to them by the ascended warrior, Sonny concentrated on weaving a new enchantment. He was now proficient enough to create black strings rather swiftly, even though hurrying threatened to cost him another finger or two. Still, in a few hours, he had threaded enough to repeat the simple weave of a summoning enchantment. Following the same steps that he had taken yesterday, Sonny created the pattern around the soul shard and then integrated it into the collar. The two enchantments clashed again, giving him several short moments of freedom. This time, Sonny did not waste any of them. As soon as the enchantment of the collar was disrupted, breaking his connection to the Red Colosseum, he took a deep breath and fell through the shadows. A moment later, Sonny found himself standing on the cold stone floor, a couple of steps away from a swaying, empty cage. He was free. For 6 more seconds at least.
Seven.
Sonny stepped through the shadows and appeared outside of the cage, his towering figure finally free and unconstrained by the suffocating iron bars. He staggered as excruciating pain spread through his mutilated flesh, a myriad of badly healed wounds reminding him of their festering existence, and hissed. Elias suddenly moved, confused by the direction from which the familiar hiss came. Then, he grabbed the bars and stared at Sonny with wide eyes.
How?
All of a sudden, he could see his partner clearly in the darkness because the obsidian body of the shadow creature had become enveloped by a storm of swirling sparks of light. Sonny had begun to summon his memories, the undying chain, the cruel sight, the midnight shard, the prowling thorn.
6.
The Stygian serpent drawn on his skin suddenly moved, slithering forth to turn into a fearsome black Odachi. Its sharp tip appeared in the air above one of Sonny's hands and grew swiftly, forming into the length of the great blade. At the same time, 2 ruby eyes ignited in the depths of his shadow with a furious light. Elias flinched, staring at the gaunt demon in front of him in stunned awe.
5.
The saint stepped out of the darkness, her graceful figure as black as the onyx, her posture straight and indomitable. Her hands were empty, devoid for now of any weapon. Sonny stared at his shadow with grim joy, and then bared his fangs, greeting her. He wasn't sure, but he thought that he noticed a slight change to the set of the taciturn knight's shoulders. Had she missed him too?
4.
The hilt of the soul serpent fell into his hand, and the length of the Odachi considerably increased to account for his towering height. Sonny didn't hesitate and threw the great blade to Saint, who caught it calmly and weighed the weapon in her hand, the hue of her ruby eyes suddenly growing a little brighter. It almost seemed like the shadow was excited. Sonny glanced into the depths of the dungeon, where dozens of mighty nightmare creatures remained locked in cages, waiting for their turn to be slaughtered in the arena. Then, he turned to the saint
3.
and said,
Kill them! Kill them all!
She tilted her head, sparing him a short look, and then wordlessly disappeared into the darkness. The black blade of the soul serpent raised to deliver the first killing blow.
2.
A moment later, something whistled through the air, and a bestial scream thundered in the silence of the nightmarish dungeon. Sonny wasn't paying attention, though. The plan was already in motion, and his efforts were required somewhere else. The familiar voice whispered into his ear, making him shiver.
You have slain.
Oh, how he longed to hear it once more.
Your shadow grows stronger.
In one of Sonny's hands, a somber short sword appeared, weaved out of tenebrious fog. In another, a stalwart tachi manifested itself. Sonny gripped the hilt of the midnight shard with both of his upper hands, leaving the cruel sight in one of the lower ones. The undying chain finally finished appearing from a whirlwind of white sparks, covering his body with a carapace of bleak steel. Its shape changed to accommodate Sonny's monstrous body. New plates of perfectly fitted armor encompassing his digitigrade legs, his 4 arms, and even his long tail. A sharp metal spike protruding from the tip of it. His gauntlets ended in vicious steel claws, and his helmet had 2 holes at the top for his curved horns to fit through. Instead of a gaunt creature with a terribly mangled body, a fearsome steel Goliath now stood amid the empty cages, jagged horns crowning the featureless steel plane of his face.
1.
Sonny dismissed his helmet and felt the collar snap back into function. Immediately, he sensed that his ability to shadow step was restrained again. and his connection to the spell was cut. The sparks that had almost coalesced into the prowling thorn disappeared, and the unfinished form of the heavy kunai with them. It didn't matter. He had already achieved everything he needed to achieve in these 7 seconds. Sonny could have used that time to shadow step as far as he could, escaping the premises of the Red Colosseum. However, that would have left him with no essence in the middle of Solvain's territory, with the accursed collar still wrapped around his neck. It was easy to leave the Red Colosseum, but it was much harder to escape it. As long as Sonny was collared, he was going to remain tied to the enchantments of the ancient theater. He was still going to be a slave. Plus, there was a thing he wasn't willing to leave behind. Sonny heard the saint slaughtering the second nightmare creature and turned to Elias, who was staring at him with wide eyes. The youth was still trapped in the cage. Of course, Sonny could have left him to die. In fact, doing so was probably the obvious choice. The young awakened wasn't real after all. Only, maybe he was. Sonny had no idea whether these people were illusions or not. That was what the government and common knowledge claimed. But was that knowledge the truth? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that the shadows of the Mountain King and the old slaver he had killed in the first nightmare were still in his soul sea, indistinguishable from all the rest of the creatures he had slain in the real world and the dream realm. An illusion created by the spell, if that was what they were, might as well have possessed a soul and a shadow. If so, were they so different from real people? In any case, it didn't really matter. In the reality of the nightmare, Elias was a living being, his partner. Sonny was determined to save him as well. The two of them were fated to die in the arena. Well, fate could go screw itself. They had kept each other alive in the Red Colosseum, and now both of them were going to escape it. Together. That was his furious, adamant resolution. Plus, Sonny really needed Elias for his plan of escape to work. The problem, however, was the cage. It was forged out of the same indestructible alloy as their collars, so getting the youth out of it was not going to be easy. With a low growl, Sonny jumped onto the hanging cage, grabbing the bars with the curved talons on his feet, and swung the midnight shard. He wasn't aiming at the cage itself. Instead, he was aiming at the chain attaching it to the ceiling. Reinforced by the shadows, the austere Tachi cut through the rusty chain, easily breaking it apart. The cage fell to the floor, sending a loud rumble rolling through the dark dungeon, and then toppled to the side. Locked inside, Elias was thrown down. Almost immediately, though, the youth regained his balance and crouched, staring at Sonny with wild eyes.
Hurry! Whatever you're planning, demon! Hurry! The priest is going to be here soon!
Sonny shivered, remembering the aura of savage, crushing strength radiating from their ascended jailer, and the cold glint of his terrifying blade. Elias didn't need to remind him. Sonny was painfully aware of how little time he had left. The metal of the collars and the cages couldn't be broken, but that didn't mean they couldn't be bent. Twisting a band of steel wrapped tightly around your neck would not have been a great idea. However, the iron bars trapping Elias were another matter entirely. Sonny just needed good leverage, and that was why he had cut the cage down. Throwing a nervous look back in the direction the Red Priest usually appeared from, He gritted his teeth and thrust one hand through the bars, pushing Elias back. He needed to soften the metal first, and that was going to be a dire process. The blade of the cruel sight suddenly shone with radiant white light, spreading an almost palpable heat into the cold air of the ghastly dungeon. Sonny didn't linger and pressed the somber sword against the steel bars, letting the divine flame contained within share its immolating incandescence with the enchanted cage.
Come on, come on.
There were two possible results for his actions. One was that he would be able to soften the metal and bend it. The other was that he was going to cook Elias alive inside the gibbet. There was also the chance that their ascended jailer would arrive quicker than usual, which would be really bad. Sonny counted the seconds and stared at the iron bars, willing them to heat up quicker. Slowly, the cold metal turned slightly red, then bright orange. Finally, at the point where the incandescent blade of the cruel sight touched them, a hint of pure white appeared. Sonny would have preferred to wait longer, but there was no time. Dropping the short sword to the ground and biting down on the midnight shard with his fangs, he grabbed the scorching metal with all four of his hands and endured the pain of the furious heat slowly spreading through the gauntlets to his bare skin. Then, Sonny set his foot on another bar, commanded all three shadows to wrap themselves around his body, and pulled. Now that the cage was on the ground and stable, he could use all the muscles in his demonic body to put pressure on it, not just those in his arms. His core, his shoulders, his back, his powerful thighs and calf muscles, the entirety of his body worked in unison in order to bend the steel bars. A stifled roar escaped from his mouth, washing over the blade of the austere Tachi and echoing in the cold darkness. Sonny pulled and pushed in opposite directions with all his monstrous strength. Already a demon and augmented by the three shadows, he was terrifyingly powerful. And yet, the incandescent bars refused to budge. For a few seconds at least. Then, when his muscles seemed to be on the verge of exploding from the inhuman strength, the metal finally gave in. With a metallic groan, one of the bars started to bend, slightly at first, and then more and more.
Yes!
Elias, however, did not seem to share Sonny's jubilation. Instead, he paled, a frightened expression appearing on his face. Without saying a word, the youth raised one hand, pointing to somewhere behind his partner's back.
The priest!
And just then, Sonny felt a mighty shadow flying toward him from the edges of his shadow sense, growing closer and closer with harrowing speed.
Damnation!
The Ascended arrived a few seconds earlier than he should have. Without turning around, Sonny pulled on the incandescent bar one last time, creating enough distance between it and the next one for the youth to squeeze through. Then, he reached inside the cage, grabbed the young awakened, and roughly pulled him through the narrow breach. He already could hear the heavy steps behind him.
Crap.
Elias stared into the darkness with eyes full of fear.
Demon! Behind!
Without letting him finish, Sonny pushed the youth away, then swiftly turned around, grabbing the cruel sight from the ground and catching the hilt of the midnight shard. The warrior in tattered red robes and worn leather armor was already upon him, the terrifying heavy blade cutting through the air with unthinkable speed. Sonny moved his weapons forward, trying to block the obliterating blow, but his exhausted, wounded body seemed to have finally betrayed him. He swayed, missing the timing by a split second. It looked like the tiniest of mistakes, but one mistake was all it took. His luck had run out. The great blade of the mighty Ascended slid past Sonny's defenses and hit him right in the neck. The sharp metal sliced through his tough skin, his muscles, and his spine, emerging in a fountain of blood from the other side. Sonny felt terrifying pain spread through his whole being, and then the world suddenly spun. The head of the shadow demon flew high into the air, disbelief still frozen in his lightless eyes. It was as though it was screaming, as though it was trying to say something, to share a fatal revelation that had come a few moments too late, that there was no escape. No escape, except through death. Elias staggered, a stunned expression contorting his soft, youthful face.
Demon? You?
In front of him, the legs of the decapitated demon buckled, and his towering body, still clad in bleak steel, fell heavily to its knees. Just like that, his partner was gone. His partner's nightmare was over. The young man froze for a moment, then turned to the indifferent murderer, sorrow and wrath mixing in his hollow, tired, light blue eyes.
You. I'll kill.
The priest of war remained silent, disinterested in the rambling of the young slave. He turned to Elias and made a step forward, raising the monstrous blade once again. It was all over. Or perhaps not. Because at that moment, the decapitated body suddenly stirred and attacked the indifferent slaughterer, the radiant blade of the cruel sight entering the man's abdomen while the tip of the midnight shard pierced his chest. At the same time, the tail of the dead demon shot over his shoulder, penetrating one of the red priest's eyes with the long steel spike. Laying on the filthy stones a few meters away, Sonny's head observed it all with a terribly pained expression.
Hurts. Crap. Dying really hurts.
Yes, having your head separated from your body was not the most pleasant of experiences. In fact, it was probably one of the worst. However, Sonny really needed that to have happened. This was the only method to get rid of the unbreakable slave collar he had managed to come up with. He had even considered chopping his head off himself, but came to the conclusion that his own strength was not going to be enough to overcome the durability of bone weave. So, he had decided to try and use the might of an ascended apostle of war instead. Death, indeed, was the only escape. In front of him, a river of blood flowed from the body of the taciturn monster. The red priest had lowered his guard, thinking that the shadow demon was dead, and received not one, but 3 whole fatal wounds as the result. Honestly, he should have been more careful. The dead were often the most troublesome of enemies after all. As the body in the tattered red robe slowly toppled and fell to the ground, the headless body of the demon raised one hand, hooked a claw beneath the slave collar, and tore it off its severed neck. The band of metal rang as it hit the floor. Sonny was not dead, of course, thanks to the undying enchantment of his transcendent armor. For as long as it was active, he would remain alive, and even in control of his body. This was the good part. The bad part was that the enchantment was devouring his essence with an inconceivable speed, and in the next few seconds, when his reserves ran completely dry, Sonny was going to die for real. Before that happened, though, he had some business to attend to. The headless demon took a few unsteady steps forward, nonchalantly picked up his head, and awkwardly placed it on his neck. Then, he approached Elias and fell to his knees in front of the petrified youth.
Come on, fool. I don't have much time.
Due to the fact that his mouth wasn't currently connected to his lungs, Sonny couldn't even growl to pull the young awakened out of his stupor. Luckily, Elias shook it off himself, flinching and throwing his hands into the air to place them on both sides of Sonny's mutilated neck.
Oh Lord! Oh gods! Oh Lord! Hold on, demon!
He activated his healing ability, trying to make the cleanly severed head of the shadow creature attach itself back to the flat stump of his neck. Sonny shuddered, overwhelmed by terrifying pain.
How does it even make sense? Why am I in so much pain? My brain isn't even connected to those nerves. Curses. Damnation.
For almost anyone else, recovering from having their head cut off would have been nearly impossible. However, Sonny was a bit special, because avoiding death was one of his specialties. There were several factors that played to his advantage. Firstly, the Midnight Shard had judged his current state dire enough to unlock the hidden well of power that its unbroken enchantment granted him. Secondly, his bones and his blood were transformed by Weaver's lineage, gifting him inhuman tenacity. That was the reason why he had not bled out already, and why his blood was capable of rapid healing. All those qualities were enhanced by the drop of Shadow God's ichor that Bloodweave had unceremoniously devoured, and then augmented even further by the Midnight Shard. And lastly, while Undying was rapidly consuming his reserves of Shadow Essence, Saint was out there in the darkness, slaying one powerful nightmare creature after another. She was wielding the Black Odachi, whose Soul Reaver ability transferred a portion of the essence of all creatures slain by the serpent in either its soul weapon or soul beast form. So, with each mighty abomination Saint killed, Sonny received a considerable amount of essence, thus allowing him to keep the Undying enchantment active longer. Was it going to be long enough for him to survive, though? That was what he was going to find out. Torturous seconds passed, with Elias desperately trying to heal the harrowing wound, and Sonny desperately observing his reserves of Shadow Essence plummeting further and further. The rate with which the Undying chain was eating through his essence was much, much faster than the rate with which Saint and the serpent replenished it. He was only able to slow down the inevitable, not stop it. His whole being was overwhelmed with agony and pain. But what else was new? Even though Sonny had never had his head chopped off before, he experienced similar tortures, if not worse. There was almost no Shadow Essence left in his cores, and then there was none. The Undying enchantment deactivated. But Sonny was still alive. He moved his lips and tentatively touched his neck, which had a ghastly scar running all around it now. Then he bent over and spat out a torrent of blood. Sonny felt terrible. He felt like a zombie. But he was not dead. More than that, he was now truly, really free.